If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 121 800 Warriors. As noon approached, the meeting concluded. Each participant placed the stone ball in front of them back onto the disc and exited the conference hall together. Viserys. As they stepped out of the main door, Alicent, dressed in a green gown, called softly and naturally took her husband's arm. "How long have you been waiting, Alicent?" Viserys asked with a smile, appreciating his wife's concern. He was in the prime of his life and really liked the young and beautiful Alicent, and they often showed their affection openly. "I've prepared lunch, just waiting for you to join me." Alicent's smile was charming, her gaze soft and inviting. Viserys glanced at his advisors and straightened his back, feeling honored by his wife's thoughtfulness. The advisors acknowledged his look with nods and smiles, then dispersed. Viserys turned to his children with an invitation. "How about joining us for lunch? Alicent has prepared a wonderful meal." "No, I ate with Rhaegar," Rhaenyra responded flatly, turning to leave. She was estranged from her father and even more so from her best sister Alicent. The last thing she wanted was to share a table with them. Rhaegar stood by, amused as he watched Rhaenyra walk away. Since she lost her status as heir, she's been more open about her disdain. Ahem. Rhaegar's thoughts were interrupted by a light cough. He looked over to see Tyland, a blonde Lannister, cupping his throat and winking at him. Though Tyland was handsome and stylish, Rhaegar found his winking irritating. After a moment's contemplation, Rhaegar politely declined his father's invitation. "Father, the Mushroom Set's caravan will be entering the city soon, and I need to supervise it." Viserys was a bit disappointed. A bunch of savages, what's the point of being busy with them? However, he understood his eldest son's dedication and let it go. He took Alicent's hand and they walked away side by side. Once they had gone, Rhaegar approached the waiting Tyland and smiled. "Lord Tyland, what do you need to discuss? Let's chat as we walk." "All right." As they walked down the corridor, Tyland clasped his hands behind his back, trying to appear casual. "Prince, do you know why the Queen showed up at the council chamber door today? Did she take any action?" Rhaegar kept his smile and asked. Alicent had been quiet since the heir replacement ceremony. Apart from a few minor, harmless maneuvers behind the scenes, she had consistently maintained the image of a virtuous woman and had never had any conflict with Rhaegar. Tyland nodded. "The last time you proposed to clean up the streets of King's Landing, the Queen privately recommended her father, Lord Otto, to take up the post." "Oh, she came up with a clever idea," Rhaegar said with a faint smile. "Not only does she bring Otto back into the fold, but she also secures real power." The resident population of King's Landing had swelled to a staggering 500,000 people. It was one of the largest city-states in all of Westeros, serving as the political heart of the realm. Yet, despite its significance, the city was plagued by severe issues. The population was bloated, order was lax, and the streets were littered with filth and reeked of human waste. In the summer, the stench was so overpowering that even dragons could smell it from 10 miles away. Before the Dragon Pit reform program, Rhaegar had suggested a street cleanup to improve the residents' environment. "Prince, you should have planned ahead and picked someone to execute the strategy," Tyland said sincerely. "Let's not forget that letting Otto go back to King's Landing will not only let him benefit from your efforts, but it'll also create unnecessary problems." "Thank you for the information, Sir Tyland." Rhaegar gave Tyland a pat on the shoulder and parted ways at the corner of the staircase with a smile. Rhaegar had no doubt about the accuracy of Tyland's intelligence. However, he could only shake his head at the implications. Nightfall. Rhaegar returned to the Dragon Pit. The door opened, and a dimly lit interior was revealed, where the flickering of campfires merged with the glow of night lights. Rhaegar walked at a steady pace, listening out for any subtle sounds on the stone floor. Roar! All of a sudden, a loud roar filled the cavern as green dragon fire shot up like a pillar, lighting up the whole space. The cannibal dragon made its way up to the top of the Dragon Pit, looking down at it as the ruler. The Dragon Pit blazed with light, revealing a single silhouette standing tall, surrounded by others in a neat formation. "Prince!" As soon as they saw Rhaegar, cries echoed through the vastness of the Dragon Pit, their resonance like the beat of drums. "Pa-pa-pa!" The bonfires were lit one after the other, quickly dispelling the darkness and bringing the Dragon Pit back to full brightness. In the center of the Dragon Pit, two groups of men stood tall with their heads held high. One side was made up of around 300 men, all wearing leather armor and carrying spears and swords. They were the original guards of the dragon pit. On the other side, nearly 1,000 tall, powerful individuals dressed in animal skins and rough-hewn clothes stood. These were the free folk who had followed Rhaegar from Crack Claw Point. One man from each group stepped forward. Maynard, decked out in a guard's uniform, looked like he'd been sick. And a thin, brown-haired young man in coarse linen, with a white falcon perched on his shoulder. The young man approached Rhaegar, bowed, and spoke in a soft voice. "Prince, 800 warriors are waiting for your orders." Rhaegar clapped him on the shoulder. "No problems with transportation, right, Tormund?" Tormund glanced at the white falcon on his shoulder and smiled shyly. "Don't worry, I have more than one pair of eyes." This white falcon was a legacy from his tribe. "Good," Rhaegar said. "Send someone to collect the equipment tomorrow and increase the number of dragon keepers to 1,000. He scanned the 800 free folk warriors, his heart swelling with pride. These were the warriors he had painstakingly trained. Now, as the dragon pit needed men, they formed a legitimate armed force. In the vast city of King's Landing, the royal family's army consisted of only 2,000 gold cloaks, and the dragon couldn't always be by his side. How could he rest easy without an armed force at his side? Rhaegar organized his men and made his way up to the second floor of the dragon pit, where his private room was located. There was a slight creak as he opened the door. Rhaegar pushed open the door and stepped into the room, frowning slightly. "You're back." A familiar voice rang out, and a lamp illuminated Rhaenyra's figure. Rhaegar closed the door, lit the candle inside the room, and said with surprise, "Rhaenyra, why are you here?" "Waiting for you, of course." Rhaenyra, now wearing a strapless red dress, swayed her hips as she approached. She lifted his chin with a finger and laughed lightly. This afternoon, the caravan of free folk looked like a long snake entering the city. It wasn't hard to guess where you'd be. You saw the team I organized. What do you think? Rhaegar didn't beat around the bush, sitting comfortably at the table in front of the fireplace. "They're pretty fierce, and they're definitely worthy of the wildlings. They could be very useful." Rhaenyra's tone was genuine. Rhaegar picked up a quill and started sketching on a piece of paper as he talked. "Solving the survival problems of the free folk hasn't been easy. The mushroom set's caravan, right? That's a clever way to make money." Rhaenyra thought of the special caravans operating in the Crownlands and the Riverlands, her tone tinged with envy. Most nobles in the Crownlands were pretty well off, and their borders was a great place to make money. Trade in the Riverlands had slowed down because of the way the rivers there run together and the fact that the local lords don't really work together. Rhaegar had teamed up with the old lord of the Tully family to organize traveling merchants who transported goods between different noble territories. They traded and exchanged along the way. This venture brought in a lot of money every year. That way, he could support the free folk under his command and also have surplus funds to spend. Chapter 122, Laena and Daemon. Hearing Rhaenyra's envy, Rhaegar glanced at her and laughed. "You're making quite a profit from collecting ship taxes on Dragonstone Island, aren't you?" "Not as much as you earn." Rhaenyra moved a chair and sat aside. Rhaegar shook his head. "The mushroom set caravan earns quite a lot but also spends a lot. Every year, the profit is divided, 30% goes to Old Tully as a dividend, 30% to maintain the lives of the free people, and 10% to fill the princess's private coffers. In the end, not even half of the gold coins are left in my hands." "Why, are you hurt?" Thinking of the private treasury she had built for herself, Rhaenyra smiled. It was a huge amount of resources. Not only gold dragons, but also all kinds of leather goods, jewelry, and exotic treasures. Rhaenyra's expenses in King's Landing largely relied on this private treasury. "This is compensation for you. It's just some gold and silver, nothing more." Rhaegar valued emotional bonds over gold and silver. If they were really short of money, the treasury could be drawn upon. He just didn't want to ask his father for money. Freedom of wealth and providing for free people needed to be managed independently. After a few moments of silence, Rhaenyra changed her tone and asked, "I have two pieces of news, one good and one bad. Which would you like to hear first?" Rhaegar's hand paused for a moment as he wondered, where did that come from? "Rhaenys." Rhaenyra gave the answer. "I see, let's start with the good news." The news came from Rhaenys, and Rhaegar had a slight headache guessing about what. Rhaenyra mused, "Laena has given birth, a set of twin daughters, and the Targaryen bloodline is multiplying again. She's still very much in love with Daemon." Rhaegar snorted and said, back then she risked treason to save our good uncle, and in the blink of an eye a child was born. 7 years ago, on a rainy night, he guessed that Daemon wouldn't be honest and would not face the law, so he took the cannibals to guard Blackwater Bay in advance. Daemon, unsurprisingly, escaped on a caraxes, and Rhaegar caught him in the act. After he left, Laena rode Valor to rescue Daemon, who had fallen into the sea. To escape the king, the two hid in a free trading city-state and organized a wedding. Rhaegar, I know you. You don't care about them anymore. Rhaenyra put her hand on Rhaegar's shoulder soothingly. After that night, Daemon and Laena were wanted by the kingdom and fled. But Rhaenyra knew that both her father and brother had tacitly refrained from mentioning them again, assuming that the culprits had fallen into the sea. Tell me the bad news. Rhaegar was a little annoyed. Rhaenyra nodded. Laena sent me a letter. She misses her homeland, wants her newborn son to grow up in it, and begged me to plead with you and father. You agreed? Rhaegar raised his head in surprise, not expecting Laena to make such a request. Rhaenyra replied helplessly, if I had said yes, how could I call it bad news? Rhaegar grunted and rubbed his forehead. Personal bravery aside, Laena was now the greatest dragon rider in the world, master of the greatest dragon, Valor. Her family's power had grown in recent years and was now at its peak. Not to mention, the massive fleet under the sea snake's command was formidable. As for the dragons, Laena commanded Valor, Malays, Caraxes, and Sea Smoke, all experienced in war. On the other hand, the royal family had only 3 dragon riders including him, Rhaenyra with Syrax and Aegon, who had recently tamed Sunfire. Of the 3, only Rhaenyra had combat experience. Syrax and Sunfire were still young dragons, inferior even to the youngest of Laena's dragons, Sea Smoke. The sea snake is not an easy man to contend with. What are you planning to do? Rhaenyra asked gently. Rhaegar's thoughts flowed as he considered the Valyrians' deep heritage. Laena can come back, but her 2 children, bearing the Targaryen name, must be raised by the royal family. He had thought it over. Daemon was a traitor, but his children had pure Targaryen blood. Raising 2 children who could control dragons while keeping Laena as their mother was a strategic move. It was a deal that made sense from any angle. What about Daemon? He won't leave his wife and daughters, Rhaenyra asked. Rhaegar tilted his head back and murmured, Daemon is a traitor, and the day he returns to Westeros is the day I will ride cannibal to tear him apart. For the sake of their blood ties, Rhaegar could tolerate Daemon living in the world but not in front of him. All right, I'll tell Laena the answer. Thinking of the plea in her best friend's letter, Rhaenyra could only lament that things had changed. Rhaegar squeezed her hand and said solemnly, Rhaenyra, you have very poor taste in friends. Why do you say that? Rhaenyra frowned, questioned about her judgment. Rhaegar said amusedly, look at your close friends. Alicent became our stepmother and Laena married Daemon. I blame grandfather for having only 2 heirs, father and Daemon, or you might have had some good friends for aunts. Rhaegar, you are too much. Rhaenyra's mind exploded at the comment. 3 days later at Dragon Pit. Stay out of the way, or the dragon will stomp you. I'm keeping my distance, brother. Then stay away, Sunfire doesn't care if you're my brother or not. Rhaegar was making his routine inspection of the Dragon Pit, and as soon as he entered, he heard a familiar voice. He looked over and saw a golden dragon lying in the center of the Dragon Pit, surrounded by dragon keepers. Not far from the dragon stood 2 figures, one large and one small. Brother! Rhaegar was about to approach when he heard a soft, joyful call from the corner. He turned and saw a little girl with silver hair and purple eyes sitting near a bonfire. She was about 10 years old, pink and pretty, wearing a white dress. Helena, why are you here? Rhaegar asked, walking up to his sister and waving. Helena was pale, with some bottles and jars in front of her and a wriggling reptile in her hand. When she saw Rhaegar approaching, she hurriedly stuffed the reptile into a glass bottle and blocked it with the jars. Her brother didn't like her messing around with these little creatures. Walking closer, Rhaegar glanced over Helena's shoulder and said helplessly, I already saw it. What's the use of hiding it? Helena lowered her head like a child who had made a mistake. I just looked, I didn't play with it. I'm not against you playing with bugs, I just think you should have more contact with humans, Rhaegar said, gently rubbing her little head. He still liked his well-behaved sister, but for some reason, Helena had become more withdrawn as she grew older. She spent all day locked in her room, playing with snakes and bugs that no normal girl would like. This was not a good sign. Chapter 123, Sunfire and Aegon. Brother. Hearing Rhaegar's advice, Helaena stood up gently, her head lowered. Don't be nervous, no one will blame you. Rhaegar held Helena's face, lifting her head to look at him. Why did you come to the dragon pit? Seeing his little sister was rare, so he cherished these moments. Feeling the warmth from his hands, Helaena turned away and mumbled, Mother told me to come here. She said that all the Targaryen children have to tame a dragon. Rhaegar smiled, understanding the situation. Glancing at his brothers in the distance, he saw through Alicent's intentions. Aegon had tamed Sunfire, giving Alicent a significant boost in status. Helaena, at 9, and Aemond, at 7, were old enough to tame dragons. Unfortunately, the dragon eggs in their cradles had never hatched. If they wanted to tame a dragon, they had to try at the dragon pit. Amused, Rhaegar held Helena's small hand. Come on, a dragon egg hatched in the dragon pit at the beginning of the year. It's a very beautiful young dragon. Despite Alicent's rivalry and ambition, Rhaegar wasn't one to let personal issues cloud his judgment. Helping his half-siblings tame dragons was wise, dragons were the Targaryens' treasure. A dragon without a master was ineffective. Helaena shared his dreamer's gift and was a pure Targaryen. Helping her tame a dragon was no problem. Brother, can I touch Sunfire? No, Sunfire is a raging dragon. It will bite your arm off. As they approached the golden dragon, Rhaegar overheard his two brothers. Aegon, do you want to ride the dragon and let off steam? As he approached, Rhaegar's eyes were filled with amusement. Rhaegar. Seeing Rhaegar, Aegon was startled and looked uncomfortable. He hated this half-brother more than anything. Big brother. Aemond, a bit at a loss for words, greeted nervously. He was only 7, with frizzy silver-gold hair and a pale green tunic, resembling his father, Viserys. Well, you're getting a little taller. Rhaegar let go of Helena's hand and patted Aemond's head, keeping his smile. Alicent had 3 sons and a daughter. Except for Aegon, whom he disliked and often lectured, Rhaegar was a caring older brother to the others. His eyes fell on Aegon. Rhaegar tilted his head and asked, Aegon, what did you just call me? Nothing. I didn't call you anything. Aegon's face stiffened and he unconsciously took half a step back. Rhaegar shook his head, stepped forward and squeezed Aegon's shoulder, a playful look in his eyes. No, call me again. Gulp. Looking directly into his elder brother's eyes, Aegon's heart pounded, and he swallowed hard. His knees felt weak. Over the years, he had developed a fear of his eldest brother. Were it not for his younger brother and sister, he would have wanted to turn and run. What are you nervous about, brother? Sensing Aegon's emotions, Aemond tugged at the corner of his cloak, his eyes full of curiosity. To Aemond, Aegon was a brave dragon rider, a hero who feared nothing. Looking down at his younger brother, Aegon gritted his teeth. Why did you have to speak up now? Taking a deep breath, Aegon, still intent on maintaining his composure, muttered, Brother. That's right. Rhaegar patted Aegon's shoulder, a smile playing on his lips. Foolish brother, my name isn't something you can call so casually. Tell me, what are you doing with Sunfire? Trying to ride a dragon for a run. The atmosphere eased, and Rhaegar glanced towards the golden dragon in the distance. Sunfire was no ordinary dragon. It had hatched from the same clutch of eggs as Syrax. With its golden scales and light pink wing membrane, it was a majestic, handsome dragon. Sometimes, even Rhaegar envied Aegon for riding such a beautiful creature. Aegon, still a bit wooden-faced, replied absent-mindedly, I brought the 2 of them to the dragon pit to meet the dragons and to watch the dragon combat training you've implemented. Meeting the dragons is fine, but no to the combat training. Rhaegar's tone was firm. The dragon keepers have just been recruited. They're not familiar with the dragons yet, so the battle training will have to wait. It's just drawing a bow and shooting arrows at a dragon. What's so difficult about it? Aegon muttered, clearly reluctant. The so-called dragon combat training referred to the traditional Targaryen technique. Soldiers would chain one of the dragon's legs and shoot arrows at it to train the dragon's dodging ability. This technique had been discontinued after Aegon the Conqueror's death. To Rhaegar, the dragons were the family's strength. While there might not be many opportunities to ride a dragon into battle, every family member should be prepared. That's one reason he revived the technique. Rhaegar ignored Aegon's dissatisfaction. The boy was never very smart, and Rhaegar didn't care. Rhaegar ordered the nearby dragon keeper, go fetch Tessarion. Tessarion was the name Rhaenyra had given to the young dragon that had recently hatched. The dragon keeper nodded and hurried off. Upon hearing there were other dragons, Aemon's eyes lit up, staring eagerly at Rhaegar with wide eyes. Rhaegar hesitated, recognizing the eagerness in Aemon's gaze. There was only one young dragon, not enough for both Helaena and Aemond. After a moment of thought, Rhaegar asked another dragon keeper, is Dreamfire sleeping? No, that dragon just finished feeding, the young dragon keeper replied in High Valyrian, a language he wasn't fluent in. Rhaegar nodded. Bring Dreamfire as well. It's been in the crypt long enough. As you wish, Prince, the dragon keeper responded. He called for helpers and went off to retrieve Dreamfire. After giving the orders, Rhaegar placed a hand on each of his siblings' heads, ruffling their hair gently. There will be 2 dragons. It's up to you to tame them. Thank you, big brother, Aemon said, his face flushed with excitement. I will succeed. He didn't care about the animosity between Aegon and Rhaegar. All he wanted was a dragon of his own. Helaena, however, was much quieter. She kept her head bowed and her toes traced circles on the stone floor, looking a bit bewildered. She rarely left her room and knew little about dragons. When her mother told her to come, she came, and since Rhaegar told her to tame a dragon, she would try. Aegon watched the scene unfold. He despised Rhaegar for currying favor with their younger siblings. How could Aemond, with his eagerness, and Helaena, with her quiet demeanor, succeed in taming dragons? He had spent years trying to tame Sunfire. I'm not going to play house with you, Aegon muttered. He rolled his eyes and walked towards Sunfire, standing a short distance away. Chapter 124, Tessarion. He wasn't interested in watching a child tame a dragon, Sunfire was his true love. Aemond glanced at his less than happy brother and hesitated for a moment, pretending not to notice. He was 7 years old now. By this age, his older sister Rhaenyra had already successfully ridden Syrax. His older brother Rhaegar had tamed the largest dragon he had ever seen, the king of the wild dragons, the cannibal, at the age of 6. Aemond wanted to tame a dragon so he could be honored by his father and praised by his mother. As for his brother Aegon, he could only say sorry in his heart. Time passed. The dragon keepers returned one after another. Roar! 2 distinct dragon roars echoed through the dragon pit, accompanied by the voices of the dragon keepers as they approached. Before long, a large and a small dragon emerged from their respective crypts. Dreamfire needed no introduction. With light blue scales threaded with silver, light blue wings, and silver back scales, the dragon was sleek and adorned with a regal crown of horns. The smaller dragon, barely the size of a horse, was equally striking. Its wings were a deep cobalt blue, and its claws, crown, and belly scales gleamed like polished copper. Its form was elegant and noble. This was the newly hatched baby dragon, Tessarion. Dragons! There are 2 dragons! Aemon's voice trembled with excitement as he took in the sight. Don't worry, they're unclaimed dragons. You'll have plenty of chances, Rhaegar said, placing a hand on Aemon's shoulder to prevent him from rushing forward in his enthusiasm. To be honest, he was glad to see his third brother so enthusiastic. Aemon's passion for dragons was similar to Rhaegar's from childhood. It was a shared interest. I get it, brother. Aemon's eyes never left the 2 dragons, scanning them eagerly. As the dragons drew closer, his excitement grew. He pulled Helena's hand and exclaimed, Sister, look! Brother has prepared 2 dragons for us. Before coming to the dragon pit, Alicent had advised the 3 siblings to avoid provoking Rhaegar and to focus on taming the dragons. Aemond had been prepared for Rhaegar to make things difficult. He hadn't expected Rhaegar to be so accommodating, presenting them with 2 dragons to tame. Helaena winced in pain from her brother's grip and frowned. Keep your voice down, Aemond. You might not succeed in taming them. Sister! Aemond yelled, frustrated as if doused with cold water. Helaena pulled her hand away, continued to gaze at Rhaegar, and muttered absent-mindedly, the beast will tear our flesh. What? Rhaegar was startled by her words and immediately turned to Helaena. This little girl's occasional nonsensical remarks often held prophetic truths. Her words were too powerful to ignore. Rhaegar couldn't help but take them seriously. Helaena flinched, her eyes filled with panic, and she stammered, No, nothing, I'm talking nonsense. I heard what you just said. What does it mean? Rhaegar asked gently, kneeling down to smooth her hair. No, no, I didn't. Terrified, Helena backed away, tears welling up in her eyes. She was scared. Ever since she was a kid, she'd been plagued by visions and the rumors they'd sparked. Her mother had taught her to be quiet and behave like a lady. Although she wasn't sure what it meant to be a lady, she knew to keep her mouth shut. Be brave, Helena. Seeing his distressed sister, Rhaegar sighed and gently embraced her. He stroked her head with a tender look of pity in his eyes. Don't be afraid. No one can hurt you. I'll protect you. He had the same nightmares, and he understood her situation. Of course, he wanted to protect her. Sister, don't cry. I'll protect you too, Aemon said, holding Helena's hand and gently shaking it. Compared to their domineering brother Aegon, he preferred the company of his quiet sister. When Helena cried, he felt helpless. He tried to mimic Rhaegar's comforting gestures. Helena's sensitive heart was soothed by their support, and she nestled into Rhaegar's arms, unwilling to let go. Prince, Dreamfire is ready, the Dragon Keeper reported. Thank you. Take Aemon to meet the dragons first, Rhaegar instructed, his voice calm. He looked at Helena in his arms, a mix of concern and resignation on his face. It was obvious that she wasn't ready to tame a dragon today. Big brother, I'll go ahead, Aemon said, patting Helena's hair before eagerly following the Dragon Keeper. He was determined to tame a dragon and envisioned taking his sister on exhilarating flights to cheer her up. The Dragon Keeper asked, Prince, which dragon would you like to try? Aemon's gaze flitted between Dreamfire and Tessarion, his mouth dry with anticipation. Both dragons were magnificent, and he wished he could have them both. I think I'll go for this one, smaller and more docile, he finally said, pointing to the young Tessarion. Aemon approached Tessarion with a bit of caution, following the Dragon Keeper's instructions. He wasn't making a spur-of-the-moment decision, he'd carefully gathered information from his brother Aegon. Dreamfire was known to be feisty and had been confined in the dragon pit for years. Aegon had told him how Rhaegar had once tried to tame Dreamfire and nearly got incinerated. In Aemon's mind, Rhaegar's ability to tame the cannibal marked him as extraordinary. If even he struggled with Dreamfire, Aemon knew he needed to be realistic. Under the Dragon Keeper's guidance, Aemon approached Tessarion slowly. Tessarion, look at me, he said in High Valyrian, trying to establish a connection. Tessarion lay lazily on the ground, flicking his tail and glancing occasionally at Dreamfire and Sunfire, clearly uneasy in their presence. Tessarion, we can be partners, Aemon said, his eyes full of hope as he reached out to touch Tessarion's horn. Suddenly, Tessarion leaped up, snapping his jaws fiercely. Ah, no! Aemon cried, pulling his hand back and stumbling away in fear. Quiet, Tessarion! The Dragon Keeper tugged on the chain around Tessarion's neck and spoke calming words to pacify the young dragon. Aemon collapsed to the cold ground, his heart pounding, cold sweat dotting his forehead. This was his first brush with real danger, and the failure stung deeply. Ha ha ha, did you pee your pants, Aemon? Aegon taunted from atop Sunfire, who roared in apparent agreement and spread his wings, shaking his head in mockery. Feeling humiliated and defeated, Aemon could only watch as his brother continued to laugh at his expense. Chapter 125, Aegon's Rebellion. Aegon was an arrogant character, and Sunfire was also a proud dragon. Together they demonstrated the similarities between dragon and rider. When mercilessly mocked by his brother, Aemon couldn't hide his anger. No, you're wrong. What are you talking about? He retorted, his pale face betraying his fear. Despite his terror, he held on to his pride and couldn't stand the humiliation. Aegon rode Sunfire closer, looking down at Aemon. Idiot, that dragon doesn't even like you, he sneered. Taming a dragon wasn't easy, it had taken him years to bond with Sunfire. Aemon stood up, glaring at his brother. You're lying. Tessarion is just not used to people yet. He'll accept me, he shouted. Despite the near injury, he still held hope. Aegon tossed his long silver-gold hair back and replied proudly, save your breath. Taming a dragon doesn't happen overnight. No. I am also have dragon blood. I can definitely succeed. Aemon insisted, summoning the courage to approach Tessarion again. He extended his hand, saying, Tessarion, you will recognize me, right? Roar. Tessarion growled, his eyes filled with rage. Come on, I can be your master, Aemon said, stepping back anxiously. He had always dreamed of taming a dragon. His elder siblings, Rhaegar and Rhaenyra, had successfully tamed dragons at his age. How could he fail? Don't bother. This dragon isn't meant for you. Go back and hatch some eggs, Aegon mocked, stroking Sunfire's scales. Aegon, Aemond is your brother. Watch your words. Rhaegar intervened, unable to stand by any longer. Family bonds should not be mocked so cruelly. Aegon, undeterred, retorted, he's my brother. I can say whatever I want. It's none of your business. He remembered his mother's teachings, an older brother should discipline his younger siblings. But he conveniently forgot the part about protecting them as well. Aegon, who do you think you're talking to? Rhaegar's eyes narrowed as he approached, holding Helaena. Seeing Rhaegar angry, Aegon felt a chill down his spine. Sunfire growled lowly, sensing his master's unease. Aegon reached out to touch Sunfire's spine, drawing courage from the dragon's warmth. Memories of Rhaegar's oppression, his father Viserys' disdain, and his mother's lessons fueled his rebellion. I'll say what I want. We're all born of the same father. Why should I be afraid? Aegon declared, gripping the saddle tightly. What can you do to me? Rhaegar's response was a cold smile. Good, you impressed me today. He began walking toward Sunfire, Helaena still in his arms. What are you doing? Don't come closer. Aegon yelled, panic creeping into his voice. Aegon, do you think being a dragon rider makes you superior? Rhaegar asked, now standing directly in front of the golden dragon and his brother. Of course. I tamed Sunfire, I am the pride of the royal family. Aegon shouted, his voice cracking as he involuntarily shifted back on the saddle. Roar! Sunfire, sensing his rider's distress, let out a warning roar. The dragon's massive muzzle opened, releasing a sulphurous stench that blew Rhaegar's hair back. Rhaegar, unfazed, covered Helena's ears and glared coldly at Sunfire. Quiet! He commanded in High Valyrian. Despite the dragon's roar, Rhaegar's authority grew stronger. Sunfire's ferocity was roused as he lowered his head and exhaled hot breath towards Rhaegar. But Rhaegar showed no fear, his violet eyes locking with Sunfire's. In a flash, a green dragon pattern flickered in Rhaegar's pupils, caught by Sunfire's sensitive gaze. A strong sense of danger caused the dragon's pupils to shrink, and he backed away slightly, closing his jaws. Rhaegar, ignoring the golden dragon, pointed at Aegon and said coldly, "Get off, Aegon. Brother, you're hot." Helaena, nestled in his arms, squirmed and raised her head. Rhaegar's skin had turned red, and his body temperature was rising rapidly, as if he were aflame. Helaena, feeling the intense heat, began to sweat. Aegon, drenched in sweat himself, was shocked. Rhaegar wasn't afraid of the dragon was afraid of Rhaegar. Fighting the urge to roll off Sunfire's back, Aegon's eyes darted to Tess Arion, who was fidgeting nearby. His eyes lit up with an idea. It's this dragon that scares Aemond. Why are you taking offense at me? Go find it. I told you to get off, Aegon. Rhaegar's voice grew easier, focused solely on Aegon. Today, Rhaegar was determined to teach him a lesson about respect and hierarchy. Aegon shivered at Rhaegar's yell and looked toward the disoriented Aemond. Aemond, don't you want to tame the dragon? I'll help you subdue it. He then ordered Sunfire, hold down that young dragon. Roar! Sunfire, having just restrained his temper, received his master's command. His eyes fixed on Tess Arion, a hint of cruelty glinting within them. Misunderstanding the command, Sunfire's instincts were to incapacitate it. Sunfire lunged toward Tess Arion, golden flames bursting from his mouth. Tess Arion, unable to defend himself, was engulfed in the fire, his body scorched. No! Tess Arion, are you all right? Aemond cried, rushing to his beloved dragon. Idiot! Unauthorized attacks are forbidden in the dragon pit. Rhaegar didn't expect Aegon to target Tess Arion. Sunfire's attack triggered a chain reaction. The injured Tess Arion roared in pain, and Dreamfire, startled by the commotion, flapped her wings and roared in response, causing a cacophony of dragon cries. Find a place to hide, Rhaegar ordered, putting down Helaena and grabbing a strong bow from the dragon keepers. He aimed an arrow directly at Aegon. Don't make me say it a third time, Aegon. Don't. I'll come down, Aegon stammered, unlocking the chain around his waist and hurriedly dismounting Sunfire. He realized he was in deep trouble. Roar! Sunfire, now free, twisted and turned, scanning the other dragons with irritation. The presence of Dreamfire and Tessarion agitated him, driving his bloodlust. As soon as Aegon was on the ground, Sunfire lunged at Dreamfire, initiating a new wave of chaos among the dragons. Chapter 126, Sunfire equals Snack. Sunfire moved with agility, dashing away the smaller dragons that blocked his path, and slammed his head into Dreamfire. Roar! Caught off guard, Dreamfire was knocked to the ground. Sunfire, smaller but relentless, immediately lunged at Dreamfire's neck, aiming to tear off a chunk of flesh. Roar! Dreamfire hastily retracted its neck and let out a furious roar, flapping its wings to strike Sunfire repeatedly. Sunfire, smaller but more aggressive, immediately lunged for Dreamfire's neck, aiming to rip off a chunk of flesh. Roar! Dreamfire hastily retracted its neck and let out a furious roar, flapping its wings to strike Sunfire repeatedly. Despite Sunfire's ferocity, he struggled to land a meaningful bite. Dreamfire, though not the largest of the second-generation dragons, was still formidable compared to the fourth-generation Sunfire. Dreamfire's experience and size gave it an edge, despite being out of practice. With a mighty breath, Dreamfire unleashed a torrent of orange and light blue dragon flame, knocking Sunfire to the ground. Sunfire staggered as he tried to rise, his smaller size making it difficult to match Dreamfire's strength. As the dragons tussled, Aegon realized the gravity of his mistake and tried to flee. Whoosh! An arrow grazed his cheek, slicing off a strand of hair. Aegon froze in place, fear gripping him as he saw the arrow had come from his brother Rhaegar. "Run, and you'll regret it," Rhaegar's cold voice echoed, sending a shiver down Aegon's spine. Glancing at the two battling dragons, Rhaegar discarded his longbow and advanced toward Aegon with a menacing calm. Aegon didn't dare move, his fear paralyzing him. When Rhaegar reached him, he grabbed Aegon's hair and slammed him to the ground with a thud. "You insolent brat, your arrogance has grown." Ignoring Aegon's cries, Rhaegar pinned him down, holding his head with one hand and raising the other to deliver a harsh slap. Splat! A slap jerked Aegon's head to the side, and a red, swollen mark immediately appeared on his cheek. Roar! Meanwhile, Sunfire, having been knocked away by Dreamfire, became even more ferocious, roaring as he lunged forward again. Dreamfire's wings were pressed to the ground, its slender neck stretched out, dragon flame ready to strike. The two dragons were poised for another clash. Rhaegar, momentarily distracted by the dragon's roar, glanced over, his expression indifferent. Just as Sunfire flapped his wings to pounce on Dreamfire, a deafening roar echoed through the dragon pit. A shadow, swift and lethal, emerged from the depths of a crypt, descending like a thunderbolt upon the two dragons. With a sharp, black claw, Cannibal clamped down on Sunfire's neck, instantly ending the battle. Roar! The ferocious black dragon, disturbed from its slumber, glared at the golden dragon beneath its claws, a low, menacing growl emanating from its throat. Cannibal had been resting peacefully when the commotion above had roused it. Sensing the call of its master, it had rushed to stop the chaos. Now, it was furious. Roar! Dreamfire, agitated at having its opponent taken away, roared at Cannibal, spreading its wings in a show of defiance. Cannibal lifted its head, its green eyes narrowing at Dreamfire. A wave of overwhelming fury radiated from the black dragon. Dreamfire stiffened, its anger dissipating. It lowered its head and backed away, recognizing the vast difference in strength between itself and Cannibal. Dreamfire had been confined in the dragon pit for decades, its growth stunted, comparable to the third generation of dragons. Cannibal, a second-generation dragon, has thrived in the wild, and it consumed the life essence to increase its potential. Over the years, it has grown immensely in size and power. Vermithor, once comparable in size, now seemed smaller than Cannibal. On their recent return to Dragonstone Island, Cannibal had grown to be 1/5 larger than Vermithor. Dreamfire, standing in front of Cannibal, appeared minuscule, its entire body enveloped by the black dragon's massive frame. It was only 2/3 of Cannibal's size, while Sunfire, pinned under Cannibal's claws, looked utterly insignificant, a mouse before a cat. Send Dreamfire and Tessarion back to the crypt. Rhaegar commanded the dragon keepers, who were still frozen in shock. Yes, Prince. The dragon keepers hurried forward to calm and guide the two dragons back to their enclosures. With the trouble resolved, Rhaegar turned his gaze back to Aegon, his expression softening into a kind smile. Aegon, do you realize your mistake? Yes, I know I'm wrong, Aegon stammered, covering his red, swollen cheek. Oh? And what exactly did you do wrong? I shouldn't have ordered Sunfire to cause trouble. Splat! Rhaegar backhanded Aegon again. Nope, rephrase. I shouldn't have run. I shouldn't have mocked Aemond. I apologize. Receiving another slap, Aegon's head reeled, and he hastily admitted his faults. Slap! Another blow landed, splitting Aegon's lip and drawing blood. Rhaegar stood, gripping Aegon's hair, lifting him to his feet. His voice, a cold whisper in Aegon's ear, sounded almost demonic. No, go on. I don't know, I really don't know. If you say I'm wrong, then I'm wrong. Rhaegar's grip tightened as he pointed towards Cannibal. You think you're proud of your newfound mastery of dragons? What do you want to do? Aegon stammered, his eyes darting to the struggling Sunfire. Don't worry, my dragon will show you, Rhaegar replied calmly, yet ominously. Roar! Cannibal, sensing its master's intent, stomped down hard on Sunfire, eliciting a mournful wail from the golden dragon. Don't! Sunfire is just a dragon, he doesn't know any better. Aegon twisted in a futile attempt to escape. Bang! Rhaegar kneed Aegon in the back, forcing him to watch. Watch and see what happens when you don't recognize your mistakes. Cannibal roared, its pupils locked onto Sunfire, a cruel grin spreading across its muzzle. Sunfire was its prey, a delicacy. It had been a long time since Cannibal had tasted its own kind, and it was eager for a bite. The next moment, Cannibal's claw lifted, and it lowered its head, teeth sinking into Sunfire's neck. No! It's going to eat Sunfire! Aemond, watching from the sidelines, collapsed in fear. Chapter 127, Legacy of the Dark Sister. Be quiet, Aemond, Rhaegar said calmly. You can stay and watch, or you can leave. Aemond stood frozen, his chest heaving as he watched Cannibal's violent spectacle. The sight of a dragon devouring another dragon was beyond shocking. Roar! As Sunfire's head was engulfed by Cannibal's jaws, the smaller dragon writhed in terror, letting out a pitiful scream. Cannibal's eyes glinted with cruel amusement. Instead of finishing Sunfire quickly, it savored the moment, slowly closing its jaws and swallowing Sunfire inch by inch. Aegon stared in disbelief, paralyzed by the horror. As Sunfire's long neck disappeared into Cannibal's maw, tears filled Aegon's eyes, and he snapped back to reality. Desperately, he clutched Rhaegar's tunic, pleading, "Brother! I was wrong, I truly know I was wrong. Please, command Cannibal to let Sunfire go, please." Tears streamed down his face, his voice choking with anguish. Targaryens had varying degrees of attachment to their dragons, and Aegon had spent years bonding with Sunfire. Rhaegar tilted his head, showing no mercy. If only you had thought of this earlier, he seemed to convey. Roar! Sunfire's frantic flapping and cries filled the dragon pit. Cannibal, annoyed, lifted its wings and used its front claws to shove Sunfire further into its mouth, much like a child greedily stuffing snacks. No! Aegon screamed, collapsing in despair. Paralyzed on the ground, he cried out, "Brother, tell me what I did wrong. I'll change, I swear. Just let Sunfire go." Watching his dragon being devoured broke Aegon's spirit. As a young boy, he couldn't bear the tragedy unfolding before him. He wanted to admit his mistakes, beg for forgiveness, and plead for mercy from Rhaegar. Rhaegar looked down at his sobbing brother. His eyes, previously cold, softened slightly. He released Aegon's hair, cupping his chin, and sighed, "My foolish brother, you should be glad we share the same blood." Meanwhile, Cannibal continued to swallow Sunfire, only the hind legs and tail remaining visible. "Cannibal!" Rhaegar called softly, patting Aegon's head. Roar! Cannibal paused, turning its head towards Rhaegar, still chewing on its treat. Rhaegar smiled apologetically, meeting Cannibal's gaze. A green dragon pattern emerged in Rhaegar's eyes, mirrored in Cannibal's pupils. They communicated silently, understanding each other perfectly. After a tense moment, Cannibal retracted its wings, reluctantly turned, and spat Sunfire out. The golden dragon fell to the ground, covered in sticky saliva, twitching in distress. Rhaegar looked down at Aegon one last time. "Learn from this, Aegon. Next time, think before you act." Roar! Cannibal was unusually annoyed as its snack flew away. It flung its tail violently, sending the helpless Sunfire flying far away. Cannibal had chosen to comply with its master's wishes. Seeing that Sunfire was saved, Aegon turned his sadness into joy and said excitedly, "Thank you, brother." Rhaegar looked down at him calmly. "Aegon, you asked me where you went wrong. As your brother, I will remind you. Remember, no matter when, where, or in what capacity you and I meet, you must always show me the utmost respect. Otherwise, I will change," Aegon interrupted, eager to show his willingness. "It's more than that," Rhaegar continued, shaking his head. "You are my brother, and it is my duty to teach and protect you. In return, you need to recognize your place and show respect. What I give you is yours. What I do not give, you cannot take," he added, pointing to the paralyzed Sunfire. "The opportunity to learn this lesson only comes once. Do you understand?" Aegon replied, overwhelmed by the oppressive atmosphere. He nodded vigorously, his smile more a grimace of fear than joy. The 7 gods bear witness. He would never forget today's painful lesson. "Good, it seems you understand," Rhaegar said, smiling. He beckoned to a few dragon keepers. "Return my younger siblings safely to the Red Keep." With the messy dispute over, he still had to appease Cannibal. The dragon would surely harbor some resentment for being denied its meal. "Let me help you up, Prince," a dragon guard offered, assisting Aegon and the fallen Aemond. Helena had hidden behind a cluster of bonfires, watching the entire farce with endless emotions. Her mouth slightly open, she stared at Rhaegar's back, deeply impressed. "Do dragons give people courage?" she wondered aloud. She didn't know why her big brother was so majestic, but the image of him commanding the dragon was etched into her mind. "Princess, please follow me," a dragon keeper said, walking towards her. Helena covered her mouth, looking around in panic. Her eyes finally landed on the entrance to a crypt. She saw Dreamfire, the dragon with light blue scales, walking inside. Dreamfire wasn't as large as Cannibal, but it was bigger than Sunfire and Tessarion. Helena's innocent mind whirled with thoughts. She believed that if she could tame Dreamfire, she could gain the same courage as her big brother. Rhaegar glanced at the girl. Seeing her dazed and confused, he assumed she was scared and instructed the dragon keeper to take good care of her. Night fell on King's Landing. In the sky above, a massive black dragon circled slowly, several cows and sheep in its claws. In the saddle, Rhaegar closed his eyes tightly and tilted his head back to clear his mind. He had just returned from Dragonstone Island, where Cannibal had spent a good half-day indulging in some livestock. As time passed, the bond between Rhaegar and Cannibal grew stronger, thanks in part to the contributions of his good uncle, Daemon. Summoning the system interface, Rhaegar reviewed his past exploits. Dark Sister Exploration Progress, 100%. This exploration is complete. Please claim the lost treasure. Relic successfully retrieved. Recognition in progress. Recognition successful. Detected as an epic relic, Knight's Glory. The prompt continued, please choose a knight. Without hesitation, Rhaegar selected Cannibal, binding them together as knight and dragon. Congratulations, Knight's Glory has been activated. You have gained Knight's Oath. Grade, Epic, Purple. Function, Unity of Mind. Evaluation, under this oath, life and death follow. With the evening wind brushing against his face, Rhaegar slowly opened his eyes and drew the Dark Sister from his waist. The ancestral sword had brought him an invaluable relic. Cannibal became his guardian knight, bridging the gap between dragon and man with seamless communication through their shared thoughts. And Rhaegar enjoyed the special effects bestowed upon him by Cannibal. Chapter 128, Alicent's Plea. The Red Keep, under the Veil of Night. Inside the king's bedchamber. Viserys, you know what happened today, don't you? Alicent murmured from the comfort of her husband's embrace, clad in a delicate lace nightgown. Her voice carried a husky tone, tinged with concern. Viserys, his senses lulled by the warmth of his wife's presence, leaned back against the bed and closed his eyes in contentment. After a moment's pause, he replied, it's not uncommon for siblings to have disagreements. He understood the incident she referred to all too well, the confrontation between Rhaegar and Aegon in the dragon pit. Sitting up, Alicent's eyes glistened with tears as she confessed, I'm not trying to complain, but Aegon was hurt badly. The maester mentioned his teeth might be loose. Her heart ached at the thought of her son's injuries. They were her children, her treasures, nurtured with love and care. How could she bear to see them harmed? Alicent, perhaps you're reading too much into it, Viserys reassured her, gently stroking her shoulder. I looked into the matter at the dragon pit. It was Aegon who instigated the trouble before Rhaegar intervened to teach him a lesson. Viserys opened his eyes, his hand tenderly cupping his wife's cheek as he continued, Rhaegar is still a protective older brother. He's even arranged for 2 dragons to be set aside for Aemond and Helena. He spoke of Rhaegar's thoughtful organization, ensuring the safety and comfort of his younger siblings, a gesture that brought relief to his heart. But I couldn't help but worry, Alicent confided, her fingers intertwining with her husband's as she spoke softly. Aegon can be quite headstrong, and having to answer to Rhaegar. How will he manage? Viserys furrowed his brow at her words, seeking clarification. What exactly do you mean by that? He had anticipated a complaint from Alicent, but her tone seemed different, not accusatory towards Rhaegar. Aegon lacks discipline and maturity. He needs someone to guide him, Alicent stated plainly, her gaze fixed on her husband. Viserys chuckled in recognition. Let me guess, you mean Otto, don't you? Alicent had long advocated Otto's return to King's Landing. However, Viserys had been reluctant, partly for personal reasons, partly because there was no suitable position for him. Alicent's eyes gleamed with hope as she nodded. My father served as Hand of the King, and Aegon is his grandson. He could provide the guidance Aegon needs. You know, I have my reservations about Otto, Viserys replied cryptically. Rhaegar may have disciplined Aegon today, but who's to say it won't happen again tomorrow? Where does it end? He voiced his concerns. Alicent's smile faltered, her plea growing more serious. Rhaegar's authority as heir is unquestioned, and my father would never speak ill of him to Aegon. Please, consider it. Let me think on it, Viserys sighed, massaging his temples with a growing headache, shifting to a more comfortable position on the bed. Viserys, Aegon is your son too. They both deserve your love and attention, Alicent urged softly as she extinguished the bedside lamp, casting the room into darkness. Outside the door stood Eric, clad in shimmering armor and flowing white robes. As the sounds of mingled whispers emanated from within, he silently stepped away, leaving the couple to their privacy. The next morning, Rhaegar was summoned to his father's chambers. Viserys, dressed in his pajamas, sat at the round table in the living area, enjoying his breakfast. When he saw his eldest son arrive, he gestured with his knife and fork and offered warmly, "You haven't had your breakfast yet. Join me, son." Rhaegar glanced at the closed bedroom door and smiled, "I'm famished." As they ate, Viserys broached the subject, "Yesterday, Tyland brought 2 pieces of news that concern you." "What news?" Rhaegar asked, sipping his milk. "Regarding the Stepstones Islands," Viserys began, his expression serious as he finished his meal and dabbed at his lips with a napkin, "reports from our informants confirm that the pirates raiding our ships hail from the 3 daughters. They seem poised for war." "War is imminent," Rhaegar admitted, his brow furrowed in thought. "The 3 daughters, strengthened by Dornish support, will be formidable opponents. And there's more serious news," Viserys continued with a heavy sigh. "The Sea Snake has amassed a fleet of warships at Driftmark Island, apparently preparing to engage the 3 daughters once more. Corlys intends to instigate another war." Rhaegar's frown deepened. War was no trivial matter. The previous engagement at the Stepstones had been costly, albeit successful, thanks to the collaboration between the Sea Snake and Daemon. Their victory had driven out the pirates of the 3 daughters and curbed the Sea Snake's influence. However, the return of the 3 daughters would be a far greater challenge this time. Moreover, in the previous conflict, Daemon had represented the royal family and wielded considerable influence over the Sea Snake's actions. With another war looming, the royal family could not afford to remain passive. Failure to act would severely damage their reputation. Rhaegar inquired, "Father, are we considering an alliance with the Sea Snake?" The royal family had no navy of its own, so it had to rely on the resources of House Velaryon. "Indeed," Viserys affirmed, a hint of resignation in his tone. "With the 3 daughters' kingdom's impending threat, the expertise of the Sea Snake is indispensable. So, what's your proposal?" Rhaegar sensed his father's underlying motive. Viserys revealed his intention, "Given the long-standing discord between House Velaryon and House Targaryen, I wish for you to journey to Driftmark. Invite the Sea Snake to King's Landing for diplomatic discussions regarding our foreign affairs." Emphasizing the need to meet any conditions the Sea Serpent might set, Viserys stressed, it is of the utmost importance to foster friendly relations between our houses. Rhaegar readily agreed and inquired, when do we leave? In a few days, during your Aunt Rhaenys's name day celebrations, Viserys replied. You may ride the dragons to the event, but be careful. Understood. I'll take care of it, Rhaegar assured, getting up to leave. As he closed the door behind him, Rhaegar's expression turned somber, and he rubbed his face in thought. Attending a feast on Driftmark. The task ahead seemed daunting, especially considering the complex dynamics involved. Navigating the sea snake's animosity towards his father, not to mention the ongoing tensions with Laena and Daemon, posed significant challenges. This journey won't be easy, Rhaegar mused, pacing the open-air corridor, lost in thought. Prince, a voice interrupted his reverie. Turning, Rhaegar saw Larys sitting on a nearby bench, a friendly smile on his face. Larys, what brings you here? Rhaegar inquired, curious about the sudden appearance of the Hand's son. With a respectful bow, Larys replied, I have stumbled upon some information I think you should know. Chapter 129, Intelligence from Larys. Larys wore a smile that seemed to hide a world of complexities behind his eyes, giving him the air of an enigmatic genius out of favor. Taking Larys's hand, Rhaegar smiled, what news do you bring? Having known the family since childhood, Rhaegar was well aware of Larys's tendency to expose secrets. Larys took a few steps forward, scepter in hand, leaning on his crutch. Shall we find a quieter place for our discussion? Of course, Rhaegar agreed, intrigued by what Larys had discovered. Leading the way with deliberate steps, Larys led Rhaegar to the secluded attic, assuring him, this place sees little traffic, perfect for our conversation. As they entered, Larys waved away the dust with a theatrical flourish. Taking a seat near the balcony's glass windows, Rhaegar cut to the chase, why the secrecy, Larys? Knowing Larys' disinterest in trivialities, Rhaegar anticipated an underlying motive. Larys sat down with a hint of discomfort and fidgeted in his chair before meeting Rhaegar's gaze with a sarcastic smile. Clearing his throat, Larys finally spoke, Your Highness, I've gathered information from 3 sources. Which would you like to hear first? In what order? Rhaegar inquired, leaning forward with interest. From the Old Town, the Vale, and Driftmark, Larys revealed with a knowing grin. Begin with the Old Town, Rhaegar prompted, intrigued by the unfolding revelations. Larys nodded, organizing his thoughts before delving into the revelations. Former hand of the King Otto Hightower, known for his ties to the faith of the Seven, has been frequenting the citadel, engaging in lengthy discussions with the High Septon. Rhaegar looked confused. Why is that significant? The Hightower family and the Church of the Old Town had a long-standing connection, so it wasn't surprising that they were interacting. Larys shook his head with a knowing smile. About half a month ago, the Citadel dispatched a group of maesters to King's Landing for service. And in Flea Bottom's orphanage, members of the congregation have been performing acts of charity, distributing congee to the needy, Larys continued. Winning over hearts. Rhaegar mused, connecting the dots. You've hit the nail on the head. With your reform proposal, Otto is eager to consolidate his power. Queen Alicent has also been lobbying the king privately, Larys confirmed. Their commitment to the kingdom is truly commendable, Rhaegar chuckled, before turning his attention back to the matter at hand. Now, tell me about the next piece of intelligence. Are you not curious about Otto's intentions? Larys asked, a glint of mischief in his eyes. No need. I've never paid much attention to the so-called Green faction, Rhaegar replied confidently. Alicent's green dress stood out conspicuously at the heir exchange ceremony. With the backing of Old Town and a few minor nobles and marginalized knights, it was created the Green faction, like Alicent's dress that night. Alicent's affiliation with the Green faction as a queen was merely a superficial label, Rhaegar believed. The true division lay between the supporters of Rhaenyra and himself, known as the Blacks, and those aligned with Alicent, labeled the Greens. Rhaegar dismissed the notion of such factionalism, seeing it as trivial compared to the greater challenges facing the kingdom. But if she entertained any other notions, the kingdom would remain devoid of any green influence. King's Landing would never be green. Your broad-mindedness is truly admirable, Larys remarked, visibly impressed by Rhaegar's confidence. Shifting to the intelligence from the Vale, Larys revealed, Lady Royce of Runestone is set to marry her cousin and consummate the marriage next month. Rhea Royce? Rhaegar exclaimed, surprised by the news. Larys nodded, yes, Prince Daemon's ex-wife. Rhaegar paid little mind to the affairs of his former aunt, but it seems only fitting for Rhea to remarry, especially considering Daemon's offspring with Laena. But our focus isn't on Runestone City, Larys continued. About 6 months ago, a heated dispute erupted between the Lady of the Eyrie, Jane, and her cousin Arnold Arryn. The argument started when Arnold questioned Lady Jane's right to female succession, claiming women were unfit to lead the Vale, Larys explained. And the outcome? Rhaegar inquired. Larys smiled. The argument ended badly, with Arnold leaving the Eyrie without a trace. It's interesting to note that shortly after Arnold's disappearance, the mountain clans of the valley became increasingly aggressive, often raiding the villages below, Larys added. Are you suggesting Arnold's collusion with the mountain clans to spark rebellion? Rhaegar speculated, furrowing his brow. It's a possibility, especially considering Arnold's sudden disappearance, Larys replied noncommittally, relishing the challenge of piecing together the puzzle. And the final piece of intelligence? Rhaegar prompted, eager for news closer to Driftmark. Larys straightened up, adopting a serious demeanor. According to reliable sources, the Sea Snake's daughter, Lady Laena, returned to Driftmark under cover of night. Lord Corlys himself celebrated the homecoming with a grand reception for his granddaughters. Rhaegar's expression darkened at the revelation. Just days ago, Rhaenyra had mentioned Laena's plea for assistance to return home. Now, it seemed she had made the journey clandestinely, disregarding any consequences for the royal family. Taking a deep breath to compose himself, Rhaegar spoke icily, where is Daemon? Did he accompany his wife and daughter back to Driftmark? I can't say for sure. The scouts only saw Lady Rhaenyra and the 2 infants, Larys admitted, though he made a guess, Prince Daemon probably stayed behind, since he's not from the Velaryon house. However, I presume you are aware of the developments regarding the 3 daughters, Larys continued, his tone taking on a calculating edge. With war on the horizon, the Sea Snake's cooperation with the Crown seems inevitable. So, if he asks to have the warrant against his daughter and son-in-law lifted, I wonder if the king would agree? Larys asked, looking at Rhaegar. Rhaegar exchanged a knowing glance with Larys, acknowledging the likelihood of such a scenario. As Rhaegar rose to depart, Larys met his gaze with a subtle smile, a testament to his dedication and pursuit of excellence. Confident that his gesture of cooperation would yield favorable outcomes, Larys watched Rhaegar. Thank you for the intelligence, Lord Larys, Rhaegar murmured as he prepared to exit. As the loft door closed behind Rhaegar, Larys' smile faded, his expression briefly vacant, but he quickly regained his composure, reflecting on Rhaegar's demeanor. With a small smile, Larys thought to himself, what a proud Targaryen. As night descended, Rhaegar luxuriated in a soothing bath before reclining naked on his bed. Having parted ways with Larys, he took a leisurely stroll through the streets of King's Landing. Unsurprisingly, he noted an increased presence of followers of the Faith of the Seven in the poorer districts. Alicent, Otto, the Sea Snake. Rhaegar softly uttered the names that seemed to perpetually trouble him, allowing his mind to gradually empty of thoughts. As the heir to the throne, he bore a weighty responsibility. While Rhaenyra faced limitations due to her gender, he, as a male and the firstborn by law, enjoyed the favour of the realm's nobility. Yet, the shadows still harboured those with ambitions, ever ready to play their clandestine games. Chapter 130, King's Landing Darkness. A soft knock at the door interrupted Rhaegar's thoughts. Who is it? He called out, frowning at the late-night disturbance. It's me, your sister, came Rhaenyra's voice from the other side. Rhaenyra. He repeated, slightly stunned. Climbing out of bed, he said, come in. The door creaked open, and Rhaenyra entered, carrying a dinner tray. Rhaenyra, what are you doing here? Rhaegar asked, confused. I heard you've taken on a big mission and wanted to check on you, she replied, walking over to the bed and sitting down. She placed the dinner tray on a nearby table, revealing a glass of milk. I brought you some milk to help you sleep, Rhaenyra said with a playful smile. Thanks, Rhaegar replied, taking the glass and sipping the milk. Suddenly, he noticed her attire, a formal dress in an unusual shade of green, rather than her usual black or red. Why does that dress look familiar? Rhaegar asked casually. Rhaenyra giggled and tugged at the hem of her skirt. You finally noticed. Last time, you were talking in your sleep, mumbling about your stepmother's dress, so I borrowed one from Alicent. Rhaegar choked, spewing milk as he tried to catch his breath. What? Rhaenyra rolled her eyes and patted his back. Why are you reacting like that? I've been debating for days whether to wear this dress. Rhaegar's face flushed red. It was just a dream. It had nothing to do with Alicent. He felt a wave of embarrassment wash over him. His dreams were often a jumble of images, and any resemblance to reality was purely coincidental. Rhaenyra, you really should return Alicent's dress, Rhaegar said, feeling a twinge of guilt. What? You don't think it looks good? Rhaenyra stood up excitedly and spun around to show off. Rhaegar averted his eyes and covered his face with his hand. You and Alicent have different figures. She's slimmer than you. Despite having 4 kids, Alicent still had the slim figure of a teenager, which had helped her keep Viserys interested for years. By contrast, both Rhaegar and Rhaenyra inherited their mother's sturdier, more robust build. Rhaenyra's attempt to fit into Alicent's green dress had the waist straining and the fabric barely containing her form, which looked a bit off. It was no surprise that Rhaegar had noticed right away. Rhaegar, do you dare say that again? Rhaenyra's mood shifted abruptly, her eyes narrowing at her brother. Rhaegar hesitated, sensing danger. What I meant was that the dress doesn't fit you properly. It's not your size. How dare you? Rhaenyra took his words to mean that he thought she was overweight, which made her feel insulted. She'd put a lot of effort into wearing the dress, and instead of a compliment, she felt like she was being insulted. She felt a surge of anger. Her chest was heaving with indignation, and the dress seemed to be strained to its limits. Before Rhaegar could explain further, Rhaenyra lunged at him, reaching for his neck. Despite her intensity, she was no match for Rhaegar in a physical confrontation. Laughing, he caught her around the waist, thinking it was just another one of their playful scuffles. As a child, Rhaenyra often tried to show her dominance by roughing him up a bit. Rhaenyra pinched and scratched with all her might, but to no avail. Rhaegar, if you dare talk nonsense again, I'll pull out your tongue. Hee, you said it, Rhaegar teased, still not grasping the seriousness of her anger. He opened his mouth wide in a provocative gesture. Ow! Rhaenyra's rage reached its peak, and she bit him on the shoulder. Rhaenyra, it hurts. Let go. Rhaegar cried out, pain flaring up. Nice try, you brat. You just don't want to be disciplined, Rhaenyra muttered through gritted teeth, maintaining her bite and attempting to wrestle him into submission. Rhaegar, wincing from the pain, suddenly rolled over, pinning her beneath him. Rhaenyra still clung to his shoulder, her eyes blazing with anger. Outside the window, the moon was shining brightly, bathing the bedroom in its light. The evening breeze rustled through the garden, making the leaves whisper. Rhaegar looked down at Rhaenyra, who had just bitten him, and paused for a moment. Eventually, Rhaenyra's mouth, which was stained with blood, slowly released its grip. Ouch, that hurts. Rhaegar let out a cry and quickly pulled away, covering his bleeding shoulder. Rhaenyra, who was now lying on the bed, said in a sullen tone, I'll go with you to Driftmark. Who told you that? Rhaegar leaned back on the bed, wiping the drool off his shoulder, and looked at her in surprise. Is there any secret in King's Landing that stays hidden, except for your dragon pit? Rhaenyra's words carried a hint of mockery. Rhaegar nodded, not bothering to refute. As the political center of the continent, King's Landing was constantly under scrutiny. I can go to Driftmark by myself. The sea snake wouldn't dare to make a move, Rhaegar said confidently. Besides, I'm going to celebrate the naming day, and Aunt Rhaenys will be there. And what about Laena and Daemon? Rhaenyra lifted her head, her face serious. Rhaegar froze, not expecting her to know about that. Unfortunately, you've been the heir for many years, but you're still too self-righteous, Rhaenyra sighed, her tone helpless. Under Rhaegar's puzzled gaze, she kicked off her boots, lay back on the bed, and cuddled him in her arms. Rhaegar put his head on her shoulder and felt his frustration melt away. Rhaegar, I was also chosen by our father to be his heir, she began. But because I'm not a man, the bannermen who swore allegiance to me despised me and spoke against me. King's Landing is the world's biggest sewer, full of snakes, rats, and ants, she continued. Every preference, every decision you make, becomes a target for these bedbugs. Rhaenyra kissed Rhaegar's forehead and admonished, don't trust anyone. They only covet your flesh and blood, and mine. Her warning was genuine, she wanted her brother to be more cautious, to avoid being used as a pawn. Rhaegar gently cupped her slender waist, rubbing his cheek against hers, and said emotionally, I understand, I know everything. You don't understand, Rhaenyra replied, pressing her hand harder on his. I know firsthand what it's like to be isolated, while you've been living in the sunshine. Rhaenyra looked him in the eye as she continued, you don't have any roots in the small council, and father's ears have always been pretty easy to bend. Chapter 131, On the Way to Driftmark. Sister, you don't have to worry about me, Rhaegar said, feeling warmth and a sense of ease from her words. Nonsense, Rhaenyra shot back. You are my younger brother. If I don't worry about you, who will? Alicent. She grabbed his ear and fiercely added, I said all this for a reason, so remember it. Of course, I won't forget, Rhaegar replied. The warmth and softness of their shared moment brought back memories, and he began to feel a hazy sleepiness overtaking him. As he drifted off, a smile formed on his lips, and he murmured, Sister, you and I are born of fire and blood. We have nothing to fear from treachery. The night deepened over the Red Keep. In another room, the candlelight was pushing back the darkness. A delicious meal was laid out on the round table, and two people were seated across from each other. Your Grace, the prince is too cautious, and I'm sorry I couldn't be of more help, Larys said, pausing with his knife and fork mid-motion and looking down. Alicent sat across from him, her face expressionless, her eyes cold. She sipped sweet wine from her goblet and replied flatly, it doesn't matter. As long as he stays away from King's Landing long enough for my father to return. Larys glanced at her and smiled slightly. With all due respect, Prince Rhaegar is the rightful heir. Even your father's ingenuity can't sway the king's decision. Rhaenyra was his appointed heir as well, and she was still pulled down, Alicent countered, her tone steely. Our goal isn't the throne but to unite all the allies we can and ensure we can defend ourselves. As she'd told Viserys, Rhaegar was set to become heir, and there was nothing she could do to change that. It was a source of her nightmares and fears. Rhaegar didn't want her as a stepmother and was mean to his half-brother, Aegon, undermining his confidence. What would happen to her and her children if Viserys died? She had considered showing weakness to ease relations with Rhaegar, but she was tired of being subservient and at the mercy of others. As queen, she had borne several princes and princesses for the kingdom and deserved high honor. She refused to live under anyone's thumb. Then you should join forces with the Velaryon house. They are quite influential, Larys suggested, his eyes darting. Lady Laena has given birth to twin daughters, and your youngest son, Durin, is 4. We could propose a marriage alliance. Impossible, Alicent replied sharply, frowning. The sea snake is a shrewd politician. We lack sufficient leverage to sway him. Larys hesitated, then shrugged. What's our next move then, Your Grace? His talents lay in gathering intelligence, not strategizing unless the Queen was willing to consider more sinister tactics. There is no next step, Alicent said, draining her goblet and covering her forehead. Viserys promised my father a return to King's Landing. Only then can we secure House Hightower's aid. The 3 daughters have shown signs of invading the Narrow Sea recently. Maybe we can use that to our advantage, Larys added, revealing more hidden information with a sly smile. Outside the window, a lush canopy swayed in the wind, with a bird's nest perched on top. A sparrow hopped between the branches, its beady eyes unblinking as it observed the room. In the dragon pit, Tormund, dressed in coarse linen, sat by a window, his pupils eerily vanished, leaving only the whites of his eyes. After a while, he blinked and his pupils reappeared. He looked puzzled but committed what he had seen and heard to memory. There are traces of the 3 daughters in the Narrow Sea. He muttered to himself. Rhaenyra was right. There were no secrets in the big city of King's Landing, except for those within the Dragon Pit, which was under Rhaegar's jurisdiction. 7 days later. A loud, deep dragon roar echoed over King's Landing, drawing the attention of onlookers. Before long, 3 shadows crossed the city's skyline, heading towards the harbour. The busy townsfolk looked up to see 3 massive dragons soaring between the clouds, their wings outstretched. Dragons, 3 of them. They marveled. The people of King's Landing were used to seeing dragons after all. The king had 3 dragon-riding children, but it was rare to see more than 1 dragon at a time. Sometimes Prince Rhaegar and Princess Rhaenyra would ride together, but it was pretty unusual to see 3 dragons at once. This extraordinary event was due to Rhaenyra's insistent request. Her father, King Viserys, unable to refuse her, agreed for her to accompany Rhaegar to Driftmark. Encouraged by Alicent, Viserys decided that if 1 dragon rider was good, then 2 were even better. On a whim, he pulled a sleeping Aegon from his bed, commanding him to join Rhaegar for the journey. This display was meant to showcase the royal family's power and their dragon's might. It wasn't just the three siblings making the journey. Lord Lionel Strong, the Hand of the King, had already arrived at Driftmark a day earlier, bringing a ship laden with gifts. The sky was a beautiful blue. Leading the way, Rhaegar rode his dragon Cannibal, its broad black wings slicing through the white clouds like a dark meteor. Behind him, two golden dragons followed closely. Rhaenyra, riding Syrax, wore a joyful expression, occasionally letting out cheers. Aegon, on Sunfire, trailed far behind, his face a picture of dejection, punctuated by long sighs. He had resigned himself to his fate. All he wanted was to stay hidden in the Red Keep, flirting with the maids and enjoying the privileges of a prince. But his father had suddenly assigned him a mission, one that required him to accompany his elder brother to the Velaryon house who weren't on good terms with them. He wasn't exactly thrilled about it. Not only was Aegon reluctant, but Sunfire also seemed equally resistant. The dragon's eyes were fixed on Cannibal ahead, and his usually agile wings were moving stiffly, as if he was afraid that the larger dragon might suddenly turn and devour him. However, their concerns were unfounded. No one paid them any mind. Rhaegar stood firmly on the saddle's footrests, arms outstretched, relishing the cool moisture from the crashing clouds. He glanced back at Syrax, who was struggling to keep up, and laughed heartily, proud of Cannibal's speed. Rhaenyra, you're too slow. He called out, his voice filled with playful pride. Rhaenyra, chained at the waist and only able to sit upright in her saddle, looked sideways at her brother, shouting, "Slow down, you're losing Aegon." Aegon, far behind, could only sigh. Rhaegar, reminded of his younger brother, signaled Cannibal to reduce speed, ensuring they didn't leave Aegon and Sunfire too far behind. Soon, Rhaenyra caught up, and Syrax began flying alongside Cannibal. She loved riding dragons and loved her brother Rhaegar, but she especially loved flying with him, feeling the exhilarating freedom of the skies. Rhaenyra smiled and played along, enjoying the ride. Though it was just a formal trip, she was happy to be there. The three dragons flew swiftly, crossing Blackwater Bay, and arrived at Driftmark just before afternoon. Chapter 132, Rhaegar. Noon. After a long flight, the dragons finally reached Driftmark. This island was geographically closer to King's Landing than Dragonstone and had a strategic advantage over Dragonstone in controlling the narrow sea. Driftmark had three main settlements. There were three main settlements: High Tide, Hull, and Spicetown. As they flew over the island, Rhaegar, Rhaenyra, and Aegon took in the sights below. The westernmost part of the island had a castle perched on a craggy cliff, which made it easy to defend. The other two towns were located near the narrow sea and were quite busy. Rhaegar noticed the many ships docked at the ports of these towns, a testament to their prosperity. "Let's go, we should land at high tide." The dragons flew around in the sky, their riders getting a better understanding of the island's layout before they landed. As they got closer to high tide, they heard a loud dragon roar from below, which caught their attention. Roar! Cannibal, sensing a potential threat, let out a warning growl, its green eyes alert. Rhaegar quickly scanned the area and identified the source of the roar as a clearing next to the beach, surrounded by grassy fields. There, a massive green dragon lay prostrate, its amber eyes fixed on the sky. Rhaegar's heart raced as he recognized the dragon, Rhaegar, the last surviving dragon from the Targaryen family's early days. Born on Dragonstone in 51 BC, Rhaegar was once ridden by Visenya Targaryen, sister and queen to Aegon the Conqueror. Later, Rhaegar was claimed by Rhaegar's grandfather, Balon Targaryen, the Prince of Spring. Most recently, Laena Velaryon became Rhaegar's rider. Now, the dragon was 169 years old, a testament to its long and storied past. Rhaegar marveled at the sight, silently acknowledging the accuracy of Larry's intelligence. Laena had indeed returned to Driftmark in secret. "That's Rhaegar? It's enormous!" Aegon exclaimed, eyes wide with shock. Rhaenyra shot him a look of contempt. "I told you to get out more. Staying cooped up all day is making you useless." Roar! Rhaegar saw the three dragons above it and twisted its massive body, roaring again to assert dominance over the territory. "Rhaegar, let's get out of here. We shouldn't provoke this old dragon," Rhaenyra urged, her voice edged with urgency. Everyone knew Rhaegar's reputation for being bad-tempered. It was wiser to keep a safe distance. Rhaegar nodded. "Agreed. Let's move away." Roar! Cannibal, Rhaegar's dragon, growled lowly, a deep rumble emanating from its throat, clearly harboring hostility toward Rhaegar. The green dragon was older and larger than Cannibal, and it left an impression. Cannibal's charcoal black scales gave him a dark, intimidating look, like a dark god. In contrast, Rhaegar's skin was wrinkled and sagging, its jaw hung loose, and the crown of its horns had fallen off long ago. Despite this, Rhaegar exuded an aura of power and experience. Rhaegar's body was covered in battle scars, with holes in its wing membranes from scorpion crossbows. Its cold, merciless eyes surveyed the newcomers, and it felt like an ancient war machine coming back to life. Rhaegar could tell that Cannibal was eager for a confrontation, so he chuckled bitterly. "We're not here to fight." Rhaegar couldn't help but feel a mix of admiration and apprehension. Rhaegar had fought for House Targaryen for over a century, and its combat experience was unmatched by any other dragon. Although Cannibal had beaten Vermithor and Silverwing, Rhaegar's prowess was not to be underestimated. If a fight were to happen, Cannibal would need to wait until he reached his full strength, which could take over 100 years. Roar! Heeding Rhaegar's guidance, Cannibal reluctantly turned away, snorting in frustration but wisely choosing not to provoke the ancient dragon. Far from the beach, Rhaegar and his siblings rode their dragons towards high tide. The 3 dragons flew around the city twice before landing, which was a clear signal to the locals that the Targaryen princes and princesses had arrived. With a resounding boom, Cannibal was the first to land, its massive body kicking up a gust of wind as it touched down in the open space near the tidal walls. Syrinx and Sunfire followed, but kept a respectful distance from Cannibal, wary of the black dragon's aggressive nature. "Welcome, Prince and Princess," greeted a knightly dressed guard captain, stepping forward from a group of stationed guards. "Lead the way, sire," Rhaegar commanded, assuming his role as the eldest and heir. "Follow me, your grace," the guard captain replied. With his silver hair, he appeared to be of Valyrian descent. Rhaenyra and Aegon joined Rhaegar, following the captain. High Tide Castle, perched on a high-altitude island, required them to traverse a path of verdant stones laid over the tides. Although the dragons could land directly in front of the castle, such an act would be seen as disrespectful to its owner. They were here to celebrate, and proper decorum was necessary. After about 10 minutes of walking up the cliffside path, the stone archway of High Tide Castle appeared before them. "This way, please, Prince and Princess," the guard captain said, leading them through the archway into a lush, open garden. The castle stood tall and proud, facing the stone archway. As they stepped through the door, they heard the clash swords. Rhaegar glanced over to see 2 men engaged in a sword fight in the garden. One of them, with dark skin and silver hair, Rhaegar recognized him. It was Laenor Velaryon, the eldest son of the Sea Snake, a cousin who had always been fond of him. As the group passed through the archway, Laenor saw them. He wiped the sweat from his brow and called for a truce, then approached with a warm smile. "Rhaegar, Rhaenyra, Aegon, welcome to Driftmark," Laenor greeted them, sheathing his sword gracefully. "It's been too long, cousin," Rhaegar replied with a warm smile, returning the gesture. At that moment, the castle gates swung open, revealing a man bearing a striking resemblance to the Sea Snake, accompanied by a silver-haired, dark-skinned butler. Rhaenyra leaned in close to Rhaegar's ear, whispering, "That's Vaemond Velaryon, the Sea Snake's younger brother and Laenor's uncle." Nodding in acknowledgement, Rhaegar focused his attention on Vaemond. With a dignified bearing and an air of arrogance, Vaemond approached and bowed respectfully. "Welcome, your grace," Vaemond greeted formally. "Greetings, Sir Vaemond. Your reputation precedes you," Rhaegar replied with polite courtesy. Then, casting a curious glance toward the castle, he continued, "I expected Lord Corlys, the Sea Snake, to welcome us. We've come to celebrate Aunt Rhaenys's name day. Is he not joining us?" Chapter 133, The Sea Snake's Difficulties. Rhaegar asked the question deliberately. The Sea Snake's domain was merely an earldom, and given Rhaegar's status as the heir, Rhaenyra's title as Princess of Dragonstone, and Aegon's position as the king's second son, proper etiquette dictated that Corlys Velaryon should have led his entire household to greet them as a sign of respect for the royal family. However, they were met only by Vaemond and a steward, a clear insult to the Targaryen siblings. Vaemond, unfazed by the prince's inquiry, responded calmly, "My brother personally invited guests and, after a long journey, arrived home a bit earlier. He has already rushed to the Driftwood throne hall to properly welcome the prince and princess," he added. Rhaegar's smile faded, and his expression grew cold as he glanced at Laenor. His hand tightened around the hilt of the Dark Sister sword at his waist, and he addressed Viamond with a measured tone, "Lord Viamond, do you understand the proper etiquette for welcoming the heir to the throne?" "Of course, but my elder brother has just returned from a voyage and hasn't had time to change his clothes." "He didn't want to offend you with his appearance," Viamond replied smoothly, clearly having prepared his excuse. "Oh, you make a valid point," Rhaegar said, his tone laced with sarcasm, his gaze hardening. The sea snake was clearly trying to make a statement. Sensing Rhaegar's displeasure, Laenor quickly interjected, "Father has just returned from Claw Isle and meant no disrespect." "No. I feel no respect from Lord Corlys or the Velaryon house," Rhaegar countered, shaking his head. He stared directly at Viamond and commanded, "Fetch Lord Corlys and have him personally greet the royal guests he has sworn allegiance to." Viamond attempted another excuse, but Rhaenyra, her temper flaring, cut him off. "Enough, Lord Viamond. Your excuses are increasingly inappropriate." Having once been belittled by her own bannerman as the king's heir, Rhaenyra would not tolerate any slight against her brother. The atmosphere turned icy. Laenor started to speak again, but the knight beside him discreetly pulled him back, signaling him to remain silent. Viamond's frown deepened as he muttered, "Prince, Lord Lionel is also in the Driftwood Throne Hall, you should." Swish! Before he could finish, the Dark Sister's blade flashed, its sharp edge pressed against Viamond's neck. "Rhaegar!" Rhaenyra and Laenor exclaimed simultaneously, the tension in the air palpable. "Rhaegar, Uncle Viamond didn't mean any disrespect." "What are you doing?" Laenor, as the heir of Driftmark, couldn't remain silent and pleaded helplessly. Rhaenyra pressed down on Rhaegar's sword arm, her expression tense. "Rhaegar, we are here for peace. Put away the sword." "Quiet, you should be convincing Sir Viamond, not me." Rhaegar was unmoved, ignoring their pleas and maintaining his stance, his sword steady. At this moment, he knew the only thing he could do was to assert his authority. Compromise was not an option. "Prince, you shouldn't be so impulsive." Viamond's voice trembled slightly, feeling the cold steel of the Dark Sister against his neck. Being threatened by a teenage prince with a sword was unnerving. Who knew if the young royal, in a moment of hot-blooded impulse, might actually decapitate him? Rhaegar's expression remained cold and unyielding. "Summon Lord Corlys to meet us. Don't make me repeat myself a third time." This visit was indeed meant to strengthen ties with the sea snake, but as the kingdom's heir, Rhaegar represented royal honor and could not tolerate humiliation. If the sea snake intended to challenge his authority, Rhaegar had only one response: no. The chill of the blade seeping into his spine, Viamond's face paled. He hastily said, "Calm down. I'll fetch my brother immediately." As a warrior who had seen battle, Viamond knew when to avoid danger. The murderous glint in the prince's eyes made it clear that continued defiance would end badly. Hearing this, Rhaegar's icy expression softened into a chilling smile. "So be it, Sir Viamond." He lowered the blade of the Dark Sister and stroked its spine, his voice soft but firm. "You should hurry." Viamond, humiliated and seething, managed to hide his anger behind a tanned face. He turned and walked back toward the castle. Rumor had it that the heir was known as the Kind Prince, a young man with a temperament similar to his father's. Experiencing this firsthand, Viamond silently cursed. Kindness? Nonsense! This prince was a completely different person. "Rhaegar, I truly apologize for the poor hospitality," Laenor said, his face reflecting his internal conflict. He understood his father's intentions but couldn't openly defy him. "No matter, just a few twists and turns," Rhaegar replied, sheathing his sword. He didn't enjoy these power plays but knew they were unavoidable. The sharpness of his blade had earned him the respect he needed. Moments later, the castle doors opened again, and this time, the dignified sea snake, Corlys Velaryon, emerged instead of Viamond. "Father," Laenor called, rushing forward, fearing a confrontation. Corlys waved his hand, his expression calm. He approached Rhaegar, bowed respectfully, and then smiled pleasantly. "Prince, I sincerely apologize for the earlier misunderstanding. It was due to my hasty return. High tide welcomes your arrival. Please accept the Velaryon house's apology, regardless of the past." His words were carefully chosen to convey both an apology and a subtle assertion of his position. Rhaegar gave him a surprised look, then laughed. "I accept your apology, and it's also my fault for arriving so suddenly." This was a polite facade. Lionel had arrived at Driftmark a day early, and even with a raven, the sea snake should have known they were coming. It was a deliberate test of Rhaegar's reaction. Rhaegar's response had been clear and decisive. Whatever Corlys thought of it, he couldn't afford to be slow in his response again. "Please come in. I'll take you to the Driftwood Throne Hall, where both Rhaenys and Lionel are waiting," Corlys said, his smile fading as he regained his dignified bearing. Rhaegar nodded and followed. He took a moment to glance at Aegon, who was slouching. "Straighten your back and show your royal demeanor. Don't let outsiders look down on you," he chided. His words were a lesson for Aegon but also a message to everyone present. Corlys remained unfazed and continued leading the way. Aegon, though internally grumbling, straightened up out of fear of his elder brother. Rhaenyra, amused by the situation, took Rhaegar's arm, sharing in the royal honor. Despite Rhaegar's rough approach, it was effective, and she admired his boldness. They walked through the castle gates, up the corner stairs, and into the Driftwood Throne Hall. It was, in essence, a replica of a throne room, spacious, with stone walls adorned with the Velaryon house crest of a seahorse and a series of wave paintings. Chapter 134, The Queen Who Never Was. The interior of the hall was decorated with exquisite crystal chandeliers and various exotic treasures. In the center, flanked by lamps on either side, stood a weathered wooden seat. Laenor took the opportunity to introduce it proudly. "This is our family's Driftwood throne, symbolizing the Lord of the Tides." Before Rhaegar could respond, the impatient Aegon interjected, "Oh, it's just a pile of rotten wood, isn't it?" Rhaenyra quickly glared at him, signaling him to watch his words. "Aegon, don't talk nonsense." Aegon glanced at Rhaegar, whose expression remained unchanged, and seeing that he didn't care, he crossed his arms and huffed. He wasn't afraid of his sister, and if Rhaegar hadn't rebuked him, why should he care? Is the Driftwood throne more legendary than the Iron Throne of the Red Keep? He mocked. Laenor, maintaining his composure, responded with grace, "It doesn't matter. In addition to the Driftwood throne, the hall is filled with trophies from my father and ancestors, including the mask of the crab feeder." Rhaegar finally spoke up, "All right, Aegon, show some respect." It was a soft reprimand, but enough to signal the end of the episode. The truth was, Rhaegar didn't care much for the Driftwood throne or the Velaryon family's heirs. It was a calculated move to allow Aegon to express disdain openly, gauging Laenor's reaction and pushing boundaries. Out of the corner of his eye, Rhaegar noticed Laenor's face darkening, and he couldn't help but smirk slightly. His father was right, it was useful to bring this stupid little brother along. "Prince?" A familiar voice echoed as Rhaegar entered the center of the Driftwood Throne Hall. He turned to see Lionel rising from the wine closet, his eyes somewhat agitated. Lionel's pace was brisk, and his usually stout frame seemed energized. He reached Rhaegar quickly, without pausing to catch his breath. Rhaegar glanced at the sea snake, who appeared unperturbed, and asked, "Lord Lionel, what's the matter?" "Prince, Lord Corlys placed me in the Driftwood Throne Hall, forgive me for not to being able to greet you in person," Lionel replied, his tone carrying a thinly veiled anger. He shot a glare at the sea snake's back, making it clear that Corlys had intentionally slighted him. Understanding the situation, Rhaegar embraced the trembling Lionel and patted him on the back. "You have been wronged, my lord." There was no point in retaliating openly. Rhaegar had already asserted his dignity and power. He could only offer Lionel comfort for the slight he had suffered. "As long as you remain unharmed, my own troubles are insignificant," Lionel said, regaining his composure. He understood the political maneuvering at play and had anticipated such treatment from the moment Viamond had staged Corlys' appearance. "You are a loyal hand of the king, and the kingdom is fortunate to have you," Rhaegar said, releasing Lionel and offering sincere praise. Laenor stepped forward, changing the subject. "Wait a moment, cousin. Mother will be here soon." He began introducing the antiquities of the hall. Rhaegar cooperated, casting a few appreciative glances around the hall as they awaited Rhaenys' arrival. Meanwhile, the sea snake seemed detached, lost in his own world. He remained silent, walking to the Driftwood throne and gazing at the half-broken mask with a blissful expression. He had anticipated a meeting with the king, a negotiation of sorts. Instead, he was faced with the children of the king, the hand of the king, and the heir of the throne. With the change of heir, our majesty has become more assertive," he mused with a smile, deciphering the king's attitude. But Corlys Velaryon didn't care. He was the greatest navigator Westeros had ever seen, having crossed the ocean 9 times. He was responsible for the vast wealth of the Velaryon house. His wife, Rhaenys Targaryen, is known as the Queen Who Never Was. Their family owned 3 dragons, including the mighty Rhaegar. Such formidable power allowed him to stand proudly on the continent. Bang! Not long after, a side door in the hall opened and a figure stormed in with an air of urgency. "Children, I'm late." Rhaenys entered, dressed simply, a joyful smile on her face. "Aunt." Rhaegar and Rhaenys met each other's gaze and smiled warmly before embracing. "Good boy, you've grown so much, stronger than your father even." Rhaenys pinched Rhaegar's sturdy arm, her bright eyes reflecting her pride. As a princess of the Targaryen dynasty, she had been estranged from her family due to tensions between her husband's family and her own. This reunion was a rare and precious moment for her. "Aunt." Rhaenyra stepped forward, greeting her with a smile. Rhaenys immediately let go of her nephew to embrace her niece. Surveying her, she complimented, "You look wonderful, and you've grown into a beautiful young woman. Life has been kind to you. And you look as beautiful as ever, Aunt." Rhaenyra knew exactly how to please her aunt, and her lovely smile reflected her genuine admiration. She had always looked up to her aunt and cherished their bond. After Rhaegar and Rhaenyra's greetings, Aegon finally approached, albeit a bit reluctantly and formally. "And a fine lad you are. You'll be your brother's greatest ally." Rhaenys embraced Aegon as well, her words wise and affectionate. Aegon, though feeling awkward, managed a shy smile. "Well, Rhaenys, we must properly entertain our guests from afar." The sea snake turned, a smile playing on his lips as he observed his wife's joyous reunion with her family. Rhaenys chuckled, "Indeed, it's good that you won't be kicking us out while discussing grand plans." She exchanged a knowing look with Rhaenyra, who walked over to the liquor cabinet and retrieved a bottle of wine. Rhaenyra patted her brother's shoulder and followed her aunt, preparing to pour the wine. After all, they were failures in politics and important matters were best left to the men appointed to do so. Laenor, reading the room, pulled Aegon aside, clearing the floor for the upcoming discussion between the sea snake, Lionel, and Rhaegar. Rhaegar and Lionel exchanged glances before Rhaegar began. "Lord Corlys, my father has heard that the Triarchy is showing signs of resurgence. I assume you've heard the same." "I won't lie, Prince. The pirates of the Triarchy have indeed re-emerged, and my family's ships have already been plundered." Corlys spoke candidly, initiating the conversation. He went on, "The Triarchy has been pretty much inactive for years. With their previous defeat still fresh in their minds, they won't back down this time." "You're right, my lord." Rhaegar, recalling his father's instructions, said earnestly, "In the face of this renewed threat, the kingdom must respond decisively. I am here not only to celebrate Aunt Rhaenys's birthday but also to invite you to King's Landing for a crucial discussion." Chapter 135, Laena and the Twins. The Velaryon house boasts the most powerful fleet and admirals in Westeros. To defeat the Triarchy, the full support of the Sea Snake is indispensable. Rhaegar looked intently at Corlys, waiting for his reply. "It is the duty of a servant to serve his kingdom, and I am honored to do so," Corlys responded without hesitation, placing a hand over his chest solemnly. He continued, "My family has been greatly affected by the Triarchy's capture of the Stepstones. Your arrival here is a great relief to me." His words were sincere, without arrogance. Rhaegar was slightly taken aback by Corlys' willingness. Upon reflection, he realized that although the Stepstones were barren, they occupied a crucial geographic position. If the Triarchy controlled the Stepstones, the entire shipping route would be vulnerable to their raids, causing significant harm to the Velaryon house, whose livelihood depended on maritime trade. Corlys' acceptance demonstrated his foresight and pragmatic approach. The exchange went smoothly. Lionel, looking pleased, added, "Lord Corlys, I hope that after Princess Rhaenys's banquet, you can return to King's Landing with me." His mission was to secure Corlys' support in the capital for strategic military discussions. With Corlys' agreement, Lionel felt a weight lifted from his shoulders. "Of course, I haven't seen His Grace in a long time, and I miss him," Corlys lamented. He was a shrewd politician, aware that no matter how powerful his house was, they couldn't thrive in isolation. Aligning with the royal family was essential for maximizing their benefits. "It seems you've had a productive discussion," Rhaenys approached with a tray, smiling warmly. Seeing his wife's smile, Corlys mirrored her expression and said proudly, "Conversations among smart people are always easy and pleasant." "You are right, Viserys has chosen a worthy heir, Rhaenys kissed her husband's cheek and whispered in his ear, "Keep in mind that the Targaryens have no shortage of both geniuses and madmen." "Just a little test," Corlys replied softly, taking a glass from the tray and toasting Rhaegar. He preferred personal encounters over relying on rumors to judge a person's worth. The new heir's hardline stance made the upcoming battle for the Stepstones seem more manageable. "Would you like a taste?" "It's the red wine of Dorne," Rhaenys asked, pushing past her ambitious husband to hand the tray to Rhaegar. "Thank you, Aunt," Rhaegar said, hesitantly reaching for the fragrant drink. "Drink this, Rhaegar," Rhaenyra called from behind, carrying a glass of some beverage. Rhaegar smiled apologetically at Rhaenys and withdrew his hand, taking the glass from Rhaenyra instead. "Rhaegar is a lightweight," Rhaenyra teased, taking his arm. "One glass of wine and he'll miss the dinner." "Rhaenyra," Rhaegar protested, trying to stop her from revealing too much. He didn't despise alcohol to that extent, but he preferred not to drink. The scene drew laughter from the others. Corlys downed his drink in a single gulp and, with the air of an old sailor, laughed heartily. A man should know how to handle his drink, especially a Targaryen of blood and fire. Alcohol is the best fuel. Yes, how can an heir who can't drink entertain his advisors? Rhaenys added, smiling warmly at her nephew. The others, not daring to laugh too loudly, took wine cups from the tray one by one and toasted Rhaegar. Rhaegar shook his head and smiled ruefully. Amid the laughter, the tension in the room dissipated, and the two families seemed to be on good terms again. Rhaenys approached Rhaegar with a serious expression. "There is one matter I need to discuss with you." "What is it, Aunt?" Rhaegar asked, remaining vigilant. Rhaegar was still resting on Driftmark. Rhaenys sighed and spoke bluntly, "You've seen Rhaegar. She's the dragon of Laena. Rhaegar is the last of the great dragons from the previous generation of Targaryens." "Of course, I recognize her," Rhaegar replied, his eyes narrowing slightly, emphasizing Rhaegar's rightful place in Targaryen lineage. The dragon belonged to the Targaryens, not just anyone who could claim to master her. "I understand your point, but I'm not here to argue about that," Rhaenys said, shaking her head. "Laena is my daughter. She carries the blood of both Targaryens and Valyrians. She's back on high tide." "What do you mean?" Rhaegar asked, cautious about revealing his stance. "I'm not here to plead for Laena's mistakes," Rhaenys continued resolutely. "But her daughters are of pure Targaryen blood. They should not suffer for their mother's actions and deserve their legitimate rights as part of the crown. If you're pleading for your granddaughters, I may be able to help," Rhaegar said, frowning slightly. "But Laena should make her own case for them. She's at the castle. I can call her." "No need, I'm right here," came a magnetic female voice, cutting Rhaenys off. The side door swung open, revealing a figure of delicate dark-skinned beauty. "Laena." Rhaenyra's surprise was evident in her voice, her gaze reflecting a mix of emotions. Laena had been her closest childhood companion besides Alicent. After all these years, she had blossomed into a wife and mother. "Rhaenyra, it's good to see you again." Laena's features bore the strong lines of her mother, her silver curls cascading elegantly around her tall, voluminous body. "Sister, what brings you here?" Laena hurried forward, a hint of nervousness evident in his demeanor. "Why the nervousness? We only have family in the room," Laena assured, her smile softening her words as she retrieved two swaddled bundles from the maid behind her. Observing this, Rhaenys sighed in resignation. "Well, since you're here, you might as well explain it yourself." Rhaegar inclined his head, his gaze drifting to the swaddled forms in Laena's arms. Noticing his interest, Laena approached, gracefully extending the bundles towards him. "Cousin, would you like to hold them?" After a brief pause, Rhaegar accepted to hold the swaddled infants. Laena spoke tenderly, "Father named them, the elder sister is Baela, and the younger, Rhaena." As he held the swaddled bundle, Rhaegar's posture stiffened slightly, his gaze resting upon the two tiny beings. To be honest, they weren't particularly adorable. Their skin had a reddish hue, and their eyes remained tightly shut, their small bodies appearing frail and delicate. "Iya." Apparently sensing his discomfort, the little girl named Baela squirmed in his arms, emitting a soft cry. Chapter 136, Daemon's Reappearance. Eeeeeee. As the cool air touched her skin, Baela's movements became more animated, her tiny mouth forming bubbles of excitement. "Quite amusing," Rhaegar remarked with a chuckle, unable to contain his amusement. Turning his gaze to Rhaenys, he offered a smile. "Consider it done, Aunt. Thank you, Rhaegar. Laena expressed her gratitude with a warm smile. Rhaegar waved off her thanks, his expression somber. There's no need for thanks, the child is innocent. Let me have a look too, Rhaenyra chimed in, joining Rhaegar's side to inspect the infants. Rhaegar exchanged a meaningful glance with Rhaenyra, their unspoken agreement reaffirmed. They had already discussed their strategy and were both committed to it. Night had fallen. Rhaegar was lying on the bed in a sumptuous guest chamber at high tide, idly thinking as he closed his eyes for a moment's rest. We need to get ready soon, we can't be late for dinner downstairs, Rhaenyra said, carefully putting on her clothes at the dressing table. I can get ready faster than you, Rhaegar said, his restlessness preventing him from moving as quickly as she wanted. His thoughts turned to the day's discussions, the tentative alliance between the royal family and the sea snake. Not only did he agree to give the two babies their legal rights, but he also forgave the mother. It was a gesture of goodwill and favor from the crown towards the Velaryon house. It is now the sea snake's turn to reciprocate. Only one thing remained, both sides avoided mentioning Daemon, Laena's husband, the father of the two babies, seemed to have been forgotten. Rhaegar had a feeling that Daemon's involvement in their lives might soon change. Come now, there's much to discuss at dinner, we cannot dally, Rhaenyra interjected, interrupting his reverie and coaxing him out of bed with a gentle tug. Fine, fine, I hear you, Rhaegar said, reluctantly getting up from his bed. You're not a child anymore, behave accordingly, Rhaenyra admonished playfully, delivering a light swat to his shoulder. It's still early, Rhaegar said, hugging her back. He didn't want to let go of this moment. The weight of his responsibilities as heir weighed heavily on him, overshadowing his youthful spirit. Sometimes he wished he could be an explorer, not worrying about what others expected of him. Rhaegar, I know it's been tough for you, but you must remain resilient for both me and father, Rhaenyra offered comfort, tenderly caressing his head. Rhaegar was only 13 years old, but he was already bearing a weight far beyond his years. Every night when she woke up, she could hear Rhaegar's struggles and it ached her heart. She often wondered if she would be able to withstand the pressure if the burden of the heirship were still on her shoulders. The castle hall exuded an air of grandeur and festivity. A long table took up most of the space in the center of the room, with the sea snake, Lionel and Aegon sitting around it, chatting away as they waited for the other guests to arrive. Rhaegar made his way down the stairs, Rhaenyra and Laena flanking him. Each was holding a swaddled infant. Come, join us for tonight's feast, we're indulging in a golden lobster, it's quite the delicacy, Rhaenys said, her eyes sparkling with joy as she welcomed them to their seats. The day had been pretty good, all things considered. There had been a reconciliation of sorts between the houses, the royal family had recognized Laena's daughters, and Rhaenys's upcoming name day celebration was on everyone's mind. As the guests settled into their seats and toasts were made by the sea snake and Rhaenys, the feast started. Rhaegar and Rhaenyra found themselves seated across from each other, right before Laena. They were laughing together and seemed to be enjoying each other's company. Before them, each had a plate of marinated lobster, a testament to the culinary skills of a house with a close connection to the sea. Rhaegar's eyes lit up as he enjoyed the delicious flavors. Rhaenyra, you must try this plum cake, it's divine, Laena offered, extending a slice to her childhood friend. Graciously accepting the gesture, Rhaenyra's taste buds were transported to the days of her youth as she relished the sweet flavor of the cake. Here, Rhaegar, have a taste, Rhaenyra said, playfully offering him a bite of the delicious dessert. As the evening wore on, the feast continued, with laughter and conversation filling the hall with joy. Meanwhile, outside high tide, the cannibal was lying on the cliffs, blending into the shadows. But as the wind howled and dark clouds gathered ominously overhead, the creature's eyes snapped open and it fixed its gaze on the approaching storm with intensity. The party kept going, with lots of laughter and good cheer in the hall. Laena and Aegon were having a great time, drinking and singing and eventually dancing. Meanwhile, Corlys and Lionel engaged in amiable conversation, exchanging drinks and sharing stories. Rhaegar was enjoying the show, amused by Laena and Aegon's antics and relishing the moments of closeness with Rhaenyra as she fed him. Despite the calm atmosphere, there was still a sense of unease. Out of nowhere, a loud bang reverberated through the hall as the door swung open, admitting an unexpected guest. The sudden gust of wind that accompanied the newcomer's entrance caught everyone's attention. Daemon! Laena was the first to react. She looked at her husband standing in the doorway and her surprise was clear. As the others turned their attention to him, Daemon, dressed in his distinctive garb, greeted the assembly with a casual grin. Hey there, Laena! Are you missing me already? His nonchalant demeanor belied the gravity of his unexpected return. Daemon, who invited you back? Have you forgotten our agreement? Laena's composure faltered, her urgency clear as she urged him to leave. Daemon, however, seemed unfazed by her concern, his gaze sweeping over the gathering. Before anyone could interject, Rhaegar's hand slammed against the table, his expression darkening. Rhaegar, calm yourself, Rhaenyra urged, her voice low as she attempted to defuse the tension. Undeterred, Daemon sauntered further into the hall, his tone mocking as he addressed his great-nephew. Well, everyone's here. Missed me, dear nephew? Rhaegar's icy glare pierced through Rhaenyra's attempts to restrain him, his voice laced with contempt. Uncle, do you dare to show your face here? With swift strides, Rhaegar rose from his seat, his demeanor rigid as he advanced towards Daemon. Unfazed, Daemon met his gaze with a sardonic smirk, his stance defiant. What, only my wife is welcome home? Can't I come back for a visit? Chapter 137, Custody of Children. You're a sinner who doesn't deserve the light of day, Rhaegar's voice cut through the tension, his grip tightening on the hilt of the Dark Sister's sword. Uncle, last time we met, you left your own sword behind. What will you leave this time? Tisk tisk, you're not as charming as you used to be, Daemon replied, disappointment in his voice as he shook his head. His eyes were cold and determined, and he was still haunted by memories of a rainy night 7 years ago. Were it not for Laena's timely rescue, he and Caraxes would have been buried at sea. The clash was inevitable. With a resounding bang, Rhaegar and Daemon collided, their gazes locked in a fierce struggle. Daemon, towering over Rhaegar, exerted his strength, forcing Rhaegar back a step. Uncle, have you no weapon left after losing the Dark Sister? Rhaegar's voice was sharp as he swiftly unsheathed his sword, aiming a strike at Daemon's waist. Stop! Several alarmed voices rang out as Daemon deftly sidestepped Rhaegar's blow, countering with a press to Rhaegar's shoulder. You're outmatched, kid, Daemon sneered, his experience evident as he attempted to grapple Rhaegar. But Rhaegar wasn't finished yet. He quickly came back with a counterattack, aiming for Daemon's heart with his elbow. Stop, no fighting in my castle. Corlys stepped in with a loud order, calling for an end to the fight. One was the heir, the other the husband of his daughter. The atmosphere was charged with tension. Any harm done would have serious consequences. For either of them to die on his castle would be an unbearable disaster. One was the heir, the other the husband of his daughter. Neither of them bothered to listen to what he wanted to say. Rhaenyra and Laena sprang into action, rushing to separate the uncle and nephew. Rhaegar's hand moved to stab Daemon in his belly, but he was halted by Rhaenyra's intervention, her grip firm as she pulled him away. Rhaegar, no, Rhaenyra's voice was stern, her furious gaze fixed on Daemon, while Laena held him tightly, restraining his movements. At the same time, a blood-red figure was seen in the night sky above Driftmark. Roar! A loud, thunderous roar suddenly shattered the silence, reverberating like a bell. From the dark clouds emerged a massive beast, its green eyes gleaming with menace as it fixed its gaze on the intruder. Roar! The blood-red figure was startled by the appearance of the dark beast and let out a warning roar before quickly retreating and distancing itself from the threat. Once Corlys and the women got involved, the tension inside the castle eased up for a bit. Daemon, not happy about the confrontation, walked over to Laena's seat and sat down. Rhaenyra forcefully pulled Rhaegar back to his seat. Corlys, his expression stern, spoke in a deep voice, I don't care what grudges you have. In my castle, you will not act recklessly. Don't take it personally. I just came back to have a look, Daemon said, taking Laena's hand and stroking it. Shut up! Corlys immediately rebuked, his tone a sharp warning. You've seen everything you wanted to see. Do you want me to kick you out? Though they were technically of the same generation, Corlys was 28 years older and had no qualms about reprimanding his son-in-law. Daemon snorted and turned his head, saying no more. He and Laena had already planned for the children's return to Westeros to restore their legal status. While the plan was originally to follow this step, Daemon, as their father, wanted to do it himself. What was the response? Daemon asked. The prince has recognized the royal status of Baela and Rhaena, Rhaenel replied, pinching Daemon's waist discreetly to warn him not to cause trouble. Rhaegar sat across from Daemon, staring coldly and contemplating whether another ambush was necessary. He had never liked his arrogant uncle and couldn't tolerate someone who disregarded the law. Calm down, he's just a lost dog, Rhaenyra whispered, stroking Rhaegar's cheek, worried that the conflict would reignite. After all, Daemon was a seasoned warrior, and she feared Rhaegar might suffer. Rhaenys, deciding to end the farce, stood up and raised her glass. "Tonight is a feast for me to reunite with my loved ones," she announced loudly. "Everyone here is a pillar of the kingdom or a member of my bloodline." Sweeping her gaze around the room, she continued, "Whatever your grievances, I don't want any surprises, at least tonight." Laena and Laenor were the first to respond, raising their glasses as their mother spoke. Corlys, intending to follow suit, glanced at Lionel and raised his glass. Lionel, catching Rhaenyra's signal, clinked glasses with her. By the end of the night, only Rhaegar, Daemon and the watching Aegon remained silent. "I agree," Daemon finally said, tapping the tabletop after Laena's persistent nudging. "I respect your wishes, Aunt," Rhaegar echoed, his eyes darkening as he also knocked on the tabletop. Aegon watched in awe and quickly followed suit, tapping the tabletop with excitement. It was a rare treat to see his brother Rhaegar and Uncle Daemon clash. This trip to Driftmark was worth it, he thought to himself. With the tension eased, Rhaenys took a sip of wine, indicating her approval. The feast continued. A servant brought Daemon a chair, and a maid carried the two babies into the hall. Daemon, who was experiencing fatherhood for the first time, took his twin daughters in his arms and gazed at them with a mix of wonder and tenderness. He had almost been a father once before, to a boy, but the child's mother, a woman of low status, had been cast out by his ruthless brother, leading to a tragic miscarriage. Seizing the moment, Laena raised her glass and said sincerely, "Cousin, thank you for forgiving my sins and restoring the identities of my two children. I offer you a toast." Rhaegar raised his glass and exchanged a meaningful glance with Rhaenyra. "Laena, you have been away from Westeros for too long. Would you like to return to King's Landing with us so my father can see the children?" Rhaenyra asked. "Of course, it would be my honor," Laena replied, her smile bright with hope for her children's future. Rhaenyra pondered for a moment, then raised her glass again. "Laena, I love these two children, and I have an important request." Laena looked puzzled, unsure of what her friend meant. "The children's last name is Targaryen, but their father is a sinner," Rhaenyra continued. "I believe they should live in the Red Keep and be raised by the crown." Rhaenyra's request was logical. The children were indeed Targaryens by blood, and being raised at the Red Keep would ensure their integration into the royal family. It would be inappropriate to allow them to remain with Daemon or to be raised by Laena in Driftmark. Laena's eyes widened in horror. "Rhaenyra, you want to take away my children?" she exclaimed, her voice trembling with resistance. She had just given birth, how could she part with her babies? Chapter 138, The Ambition of Return. "Laena, calm down," Rhaenyra said, understanding her friend's distress. "The children will return to King's Landing, and naturally, as their mother, you can follow, care for, and be with them." This arrangement had been part of the initial plan she and Rhaegar had devised. The presence of a strong dragon rider and two new Targaryen heirs would be in the royal family's best interest. Laena's frown deepened, her eyes flickering with mixed emotions. She understood Rhaenyra's reasoning, but it didn't make the situation any easier. Her children were indeed Targaryens by blood, born into the royal family. "Wait," Daemon interjected, frowning and resting his chin on his hand. "When discussing the future of my daughters, shouldn't my opinion count?" Rhaenyra glanced at him with a bemused expression, unwilling to engage. In her eyes, Daemon's words carried no weight. "Sir Daemon, you are a wanted criminal of the kingdom," Lionel said, his face furious. "Allowing you to sit at this table is already a courtesy for Princess Rhaenys' sake. It's ridiculous that you are fighting over my daughters and yet won't allow me, their father, to voice my opinion." Daemon mocked, leaning down to kiss his daughter's cheeks. "Daemon, what is your true purpose for being here?" Rhaegar demanded, his patience wearing thin. Daemon's sudden appearance was too suspicious to ignore. The room fell silent as everyone turned to Daemon, curiosity and skepticism in their eyes. Returning home seemed impossible for him. Since his betrayal, he lost his position. Daemon's arrogance melted away as he bowed his head and looked at his daughters. After years of wandering through the free cities, he was uncertain about what to do next. He and Laena, with their unbeatable dragons, were in high demand. Princes, nobles, and wealthy merchants were eager to offer them estates and riches. Daemon knew this was just a business transaction. He couldn't suppress his pride and submit to a foreign kingdom for wealth, using dragon power in exchange for comfort. He was of dragon blood, a pure Targaryen. The people of the free cities were unworthy of his service. In his dreams, he often recalled the glory of old Valyria, where the free cities once belonged. Those fat-bellied fools should have been slaves to the house of the dragon lords. Laena wasn't the only one longing for home. Daemon missed it too, especially after the birth of his daughters. He began to understand his brother Viserys' anger towards him. This realization spurred him to plan for his family's future, leading Laena to write to Rhaenyra, seeking mercy. "Rhaegar, you're as sharp as ever," Daemon said, lifting his head high as he addressed his nephew directly for the first time. "War is coming, and the kingdom needs my strength." Rhaegar eyed him with disdain. "Uncle, the kingdom has the might of all the major lords and knights. Your help is indispensable. The pirates of the Three Daughters Kingdom are no small matter. The battlefield needs a wise and brave member of the royal family to lead the army," Daemon insisted, his face calm and confident. "In the current House Targaryen, I am the only adult male with the ability to command on the battlefield and possess a dragon. Don't you think you're too full of yourself?" Rhaegar frowned, questioning Daemon's intentions. He couldn't believe Daemon was actually considering rejoining the family. "Not at all. I'm simply stating the truth," Daemon replied, crossing his legs and speaking calmly. He was aware of his own situation and the challenges Westeros, and his brother Viserys, faced. Viserys couldn't go to war, and his nephews were still young and untested. This upcoming battle was Daemon's chance to clear his name and reunite with his brother. Rhaegar looked deeply into Daemon's eyes, trying to discern his true intentions. "Rhaegar," Rhaenyra called softly, leaning down to whisper in his ear, "what are you going to do?" She understood the gravity of Daemon's words. The last battle of the Stepstones had lasted for years, and Daemon, along with the Sea Snake, had endured heavy losses. She didn't want her brother to risk his life in battle. Daemon could be a useful substitute if they could use Laena and the children as leverage. "No. I won't." Rhaegar ignored the implication of his sister's words. Looking straight into Daemon's eyes, he said solemnly, "The kingdom doesn't need a criminal like you, and you're not the only Targaryen who can go to war." He stood up, a strand of silver hair falling into his eyes, and declared forcefully, "When war comes, I will ride my dragon into battle and make the enemy pay with blood and fire." He then warned Daemon, "As for you, you'd better leave before the feast is over." "Well said." Targaryen has no shortage of bloodthirsty men, Rhaenys, who had been watching silently, applauded. She then glanced at Daemon, her expression stern. "Daemon, adjust your attitude. No one is indispensable." She was reminding Daemon that if he wanted forgiveness, he needed to humble himself and seek Viserys' mercy, not negotiate with the younger generation. Daemon, anticipating rejection, remained silent. He knew he should have approached his brother Viserys to make peace, even if it meant risking his life. Anything was better than wasting his time here. Once again, the atmosphere dropped to a freezing point. Laena nudged her husband, urging him to leave. Daemon, however, remained seated, defiant. "Rhaenyra, I won't leave my children," Laena asserted, "but I'll consider your offer carefully." Rhaenyra reiterated her proposal. "If you are not sure, I can adopt the children myself." "But you're not married," Laena pointed out. "It doesn't matter," Rhaenyra replied with a slight smile. "I have Dragonstone as my fiefdom, and I am qualified to adopt a daughter. As their adoptive mother, I will place dragon eggs in their cradles." Dragon eggs? Laena was a bit taken aback by the mention of such a precious gift. Restoring her children's royal status was important, but securing dragon eggs was equally critical. Several dragons resided on Driftmark. Rhaegar, the mother of dragons, had laid many eggs. Dreamfire, Vermithor, and Silverwing were her direct descendants. Though by the time Laena tamed Rhaegar, she was too old to lay more eggs. Sea Smoke and Caraxes had never laid eggs. Meleys, known as the Red Queen, had a connection to egg-laying due to her distinctive red scales, but the royal family controlled all her eggs strictly, taking them all. To place dragon eggs in her daughters' cradles, Laena knew she had to seek the royal family's forgiveness and secure the eggs from them. This was a rare opportunity, and Rhaenyra's offer was tempting. Chapter 139, Uncle, you have to leave something behind. Rhaenyra, you are truly generous, Laena said, her mind racing with thoughts about the fate of her children. If possible, she wanted to renew the alliance between the Targaryens and Valyrians. After all, her mother, husband, and children were all Targaryens. Rhaenyra smiled and said, "Think about it. You still have a few days before you return to King's Landing." She knew Laena to be sensitive and intelligent, and she trusted that Laena would make the right choice to avoid potential conflicts between the two houses. Their conversation served as a good diversion. The banquet had lost its lively atmosphere, and everyone present seemed disillusioned. Aegon looked around, amazed, as he cut into the roasted meat on his plate. Laenor snorted and rose to raise his glass, trying to lighten the mood, but no one paid him any mind. Most people were lost in their own thoughts, considering their interests. It was getting late, and the banquet was nearing its end. Daemon held his two daughters in his arms, lost in thought. He was only snapped out of it when one of the babies cried. "Laena, the baby seems to be hungry," Daemon said, frowning as he handed the swaddled infant to his wife. Laena was quick to pick up the baby and hand her over to the nursemaid behind her. Her corseted dress made it difficult for her to breastfeed. Like Daemon, Rhaegar remained silent, leaning back in his chair, chin resting on his hands, his eyes scanning the room. Daemon noticed his nephew's unease, and irritation welled up inside him as he walked over to Rhaegar. Daemon walked over to Rhaegar, putting one hand on the tabletop as he went. "How is my brother?" he asked. Viserys had often been cut by the Iron Throne, and after all these years, Daemon wanted to know how he was doing. "No one has angered him. Father is doing well," Rhaegar replied slowly, his eyes narrowing slightly. "And what about Alicent? That woman hasn't been rejected yet?" Daemon's eyes twinkled with curiosity as he brought up his old adversary. "She's fine, too. She has father another son to look after," Rhaegar responded. "None of the Hightower women are any good, just trouble for the men," Daemon said with disgust. "She's given you a lot of trouble, hasn't she?" Rhaegar remained silent. "What, did I guess right?" Daemon leaned closer, trying to get a better look at his nephew. "Uncle, do you remember what I told you when you first came in?" Rhaegar asked, his head hanging low, hair messy around his ears. Daemon was slightly stunned, not understanding what he meant. Suddenly, realization dawned on him, and he followed Rhaegar's line of sight to the gold-plated clock on the wall. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The second hand of the clock completed its revolution, and the minute and hour hands jumped to 12 o'clock. Tick-tock. The clock struck midnight, marking the start of a new day. "A new day has begun, Uncle," Rhaegar said. As the clock chimed, Rhaegar jumped up and hit Daemon's head against the table. There was a crunching sound as the impact broke Daemon's nose. "My good uncle, you haven't learned your lesson from 7 years ago." Rhaegar's pupils narrowed with rage as he grabbed a table knife and plunged it into Daemon's left hand, pinning it to the tabletop. Rhaenys had said there would be no accidents last night, and he would honor that. He'd been waiting patiently for midnight. Pfft! Blood splattered as the silver dinner knife stabbed through Daemon's palm and nailed it to the tabletop. "Ah!" Daemon let out a cry of pain as soon as he felt the knife pierce his palm. Outside the castle. Roar! A sharp roar pierced the night as Caraxes revealed himself, sensing his master's danger. Without hesitation, it dove towards the castle. Roar! Cannibal, more prepared and faster, burst from the castle with a flap of its wings. Its coal-black body slammed into Caraxes, and it had been waiting for this moment for a long time. This time, it was decided to tear this slim red worm apart. When attacked, Caraxes screamed in terror, slashing with its claws and opening its jaws to unleash scarlet dragon fire at Cannibal. Roar! Cannibal dodged the flames and bit down on one of Caraxes' wings, shaking its head and tearing the wing apart. After Rhaegar's training, Cannibal was really skilled at dragon combat. Destroying the wing first would make the opponent an easy target. As his flesh and blood were torn apart, Caraxes twisted his body frantically, using his long neck to bite Cannibal's neck. Stab! Sharp teeth pierced scales, and Cannibal roared with rage as blood spilled. It tore off a piece of flesh with one bite, and its huge dragon head swung around, smashing into Caraxes' head. With a thud, Caraxes was momentarily blinded, his sharp teeth yanking off more flesh. Cannibal wasn't fazed by the minor wound and became even more ferocious. The dragon aimed for Caraxes' head and shot green dragon fire like a fountain. Roar! The flames bombarded Caraxes' face, causing him to scream as his sharp claws frantically tore at Cannibal's belly, desperately seeking a chance of survival. Inside the castle, Daemon's screams echoed terrifyingly through the halls. Rhaegar! Rhaenyra's eyes widened, not expecting Rhaegar to strike so suddenly. "Uncle, I told you, you have to leave something behind." Rhaegar's smile grew wilder as he nimbly pulled out his dark sister and slashed at Daemon's pinned palm. "Get off!" At the critical moment, Daemon reacted quickly, kicking Rhaegar in the abdomen. The force of the kick made Rhaegar stagger, and the sword he was swinging struck Daemon's shoulder. "Ah! Damn it!" Daemon, his spirit tense from the intense pain, quickly pulled the table knife from his left hand and threw it at Rhaegar's chest. Clang! Rhaegar's quick reflexes allowed him to block the dinner knife with the spine of his sword. "Go to hell!" Seizing the opportunity to turn the tables, Daemon picked up dinner plates from the table and threw them at Rhaegar, getting in the way of his sword swings. He then grabbed a chair and slammed it down on Rhaegar's face. "You're the one who deserves to die." Rhaegar raised his sword to block the chair and then kicked Daemon in the chest. Wham! The Dark Sister couldn't block the blow, and the wooden chair shattered on Rhaegar's head, blood oozing from the wound. Almost simultaneously, Daemon was kicked in the chest, spitting blood as he flew backward. Rhaegar! Daemon! The uncle and nephew were too quick for anyone to intervene until it was too late. Rhaenyra, standing next to Rhaegar, was hit by the broken pieces of the chair, cutting her face and neck. In the emergency, she rushed to support the swaying Rhaegar. On the other hand, Laena sprang from her seat and ran to her husband's side. She was well read in poetry and had some knowledge of medicine, so she knew the fight between uncle and nephew had been deadly and aimed at vital points. Chapter 140, Rhaegar vs Cannibal. "Go away, I don't need you." Laena was about to check her husband's injuries when Daemon pushed her aside and laboriously climbed to his feet on his own. Pfft! Out of breath, Daemon spat out another mouthful of blood. He staggered towards Rhaegar, picked up what was left of the solid wood chair, and raised it high in the air, ready to slam it down again. "Stop!" Rhaenyra, shocked and disoriented, instinctively grabbed Rhaegar and turned to shield him. "Get out of the way!" Before Rhaenyra could fall, Rhaegar hurriedly dragged her to the side and seized her chair. Compared to the dazed Daemon, Rhaegar seemed uninjured, and his strikes were still fast and hard. Before Daemon could strike, Rhaegar rounded the side of the wooden chair and smashed his legs. Wow! The second solid wood chair shattered, and Daemon was knocked over, his head hitting the cold floorboards hard. "That's enough, stop it!" Seeing this, Corlys was shocked and moved to intervene. On one side, Lionel rushed out, his bloated body blocking the way, his eyes sharp. "What do you mean?" Corlys glared. Lionel puffed out his chest and said in a deep voice, "We have complied with Princess Rhaenys' request, and now it's the second day." Though Lionel appeared obese, it was just middle-aged fat. In his youth, he had been a warrior who could wield a hammer, and his eldest son, Harwin, had inherited his strength. Laena's face changed when he saw his father being stopped. Just as he stood up, a grease-stained table knife was pressed against his throat, forcing him to remain still. Turning back, he saw an excited Aegon, knife in hand, saying with a sinister smile, "Stay still, cousin." He too was a pure Targaryen, with madness lurking within him, and he couldn't afford to let a big show be interrupted. On the other hand, the fight between the two dragons continued. Caraxes, having battlefield experience, did not lack battle prowess. In a panic, its claws stabbed into Cannibal's belly, trying to gut it. Roar! Cannibal, not willing to let that happen, roared and kicked Caraxes away. With a flap of his wings, he rose quickly into the air and circled around the unsteady Caraxes. Soon, it found a weak point. Its huge body swooped down again, jaws wide open to attack Caraxes' neck. Boom! As it approached, Caraxes continued to spew dragon fire, trying to force the approaching black dragon to retreat. The flames seemed endless, as if they were inexhaustible. Cannibal, with his thick skin, managed to break through the fire with his eyes closed. Realizing the situation was dire, Caraxes stopped spewing fire and twisted its slender body to avoid the charge. Roar! Cannibal, faster, bit down on Caraxes' tail, dragging it. The tail, crucial for Caraxes' balance, was now a liability. Caraxes immediately turned its head and bit into Cannibal's neck. Boom! Cannibal let go of the tail and spat dragon fire, roaring. Pfft! Cannibal continued his attack, biting into Caraxes' wing. Dragon blood spurted into the night sky. Amidst Caraxes' screams, Cannibal's eyes were filled with rage as it greedily tore at the flesh, violently ripping one wing apart. With its wing severely damaged, Caraxes remembered the rainy night 7 years ago when it crashed into the sea. In fear, it struggled desperately, burning Cannibal's head with dragon fire. Cannibal twisted his head, sinking his claws into Caraxes' flesh and opening his mouth to bite at its neck. Roar! At that moment, a dragon's roar, like muffled thunder, filled the night sky with fury. In the next second, a huge beast comparable to a mountain rushed out of the clouds and opened its bloody mouth to attack the defenseless cannibal. In response, the cannibal bit down on Caraxes' neck, using it as a shield. Boom! A monstrous force struck, knocking Cannibal off balance and sending him tumbling to the ground. Roar! Caught in the middle, Caraxes let out a miserable scream and fell with Cannibal. At that moment, Cannibal got a good look at the beast that attacked him, the fierce and tyrannical Rhaegar. A dragon shares the heart of its master. Rhaegar and Daemon fought, and Cannibal attacked Caraxes. Laena worried about Daemon, and Rhaegar came to rescue his longtime companion, Caraxes. However, Caraxes was now in a terrible state. The 3 dragons were entangled, with Cannibal in the most dangerous position, back on the ground. Rhaegar slowly descended, and Cannibal flapped its wings desperately to escape. Roar! Rhaegar recognized Cannibal and immediately chased after it as it fled. As the 2 giants disappeared, Caraxes managed to move, flapping its intact wing to break its fall and avoid death. Still, it let out a mournful cry at the impact. It lay on its back, writhing in the shallows below like a long red snake. In the sky, Rhaegar and Cannibal chased each other, creating a storm that swept across half of Driftmark. Cannibal quickly disappeared into the night clouds, planning to sneak up on them the old-fashioned way. Rhaegar, more experienced in battle, spewed orange and yellow dragon fire that covered the sky. Roar! Cannibal burst through the flames, bloodthirsty eyes locked on Rhaegar, biting into the opponent's thick neck. Roar! Roar! The struggle between the 2 dragons had just begun. Several roars were heard on Driftmark, one after the other. First appeared a red dragon with fierce reddish scales and a crown. Following was a slightly smaller white dragon with a light silver-grey body. Both dragons roared upon seeing Cannibal biting Rhaegar. At the same time, 2 more golden dragons of similar size emerged from the night sky. The 4 dragons faced each other in the air, an uneasiness rising. Roar! The most handsome Sunfire, with the strongest temperament, locked his pupils on the larger Meraxes and charged. Its courage was immense. Last time it had dared to attack Dreamfire, and now it had no fear of melees. Roar! Sunfire sounded the horn of war, and sea smoke roared, swooping down to face the angry Syrax. In an instant, the 6 dragons faced each other, fighting each other within the sky. The roar of the 6 dragons was so loud it woke countless people from their sleep. On the night sky, various colors of dragon fire competed and erupted, painting the sky in gold, scarlet, orange, and ghostly green. Roar! The battle intensified as Cannibal bit down on Rhaegar's neck, its claws piercing through the scaled armor. After years of growth, Rhaegar was still a formidable force. With excellent speed, it was not without a fighting chance. Roar! Bitten by the neck, Rhaegar let out a dull roar. Its claws immediately ripped open the belly of Cannibal, tearing a bloody gash. The old dragon's fury would make the younger generation understand the consequences of offending it. Word count, 1142.
Thanks for listening.